Commissioners meeting. We're thrilled to have all of you with us tonight. We have a nice full house. It's always wonderful. Our Pledge of Allegiance tonight, we're going to be led by Police Chief Bill Carter. Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Chief. Our invocation tonight is from the Wendell Council of Churches, and we're going to be hearing from Reverend James Lee of the First Baptist Church of Wendell. Reverend Lee.
Again, Madam Mayor and
Great. I hope you're well.
To you who are present tonight, we are pleased to be here, and we thank God for the opportunity. May we bow our heads. Our wise and merciful God, our Father, we thank you for this privilege, and we thank you for the opportunity that you have granted us one more time, and we pray as we come that you will continue to be with the representatives of this organization and this board meeting, that what's come up on the mind be dispensed in the way that you would have it to be, not of our own understanding, but of yours. We pray that you will continue to look down upon us and give us grace and knowledge to know that all things do work together for them that love you. We have the power, and we have all dimension of what you have for us to be. We don't know what and how the situation of the meeting might be, but you know already. But give these, your representatives, strength to know that you're by their side. Let it not be them, but you, oh Lord. We love you, we praise you, we magnify your name. Amen.
Thank you again, Reverend Lee. We always appreciate you being here.
Welcome.
Are there any adjustments to the agenda? And if not, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Public comment. We have one person signed up for public comment, Ms. Diana Wynn of the League of Women Voters of Wake County. Good evening. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Good evening. My name is Diana Wynn. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Wake County. We are a nonpartisan political organization working to encourage active participation in government. Last month, on August 23rd, the League hosted its annual Women's Equality Day reception in celebration of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which finally acknowledged women's right to vote in 1920. That evening, we recognized all women currently elected to state and county offices, to city and town councils within Wake County, and to the judiciary. Unfortunately, Mayor Gray was unable to attend that evening, so I'm here to present her with the certificate of appreciation that she would have received that evening. The certificate reads as follows. The League of Women Voters of Wake County presents this certificate to the Honorable Virginia Gray for her public service and in celebration of Women's Equality Day. On behalf of the League, Mayor Gray, I'd like to thank you for your service to the citizens of Wendell. And with your permission, I'd like to approach the dais and give you your certificate.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for being here. It's very kind of you to go out of your way on an evening and bring it. Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Item number 4 is an evidentiary quasi-judicial hearing for Plan Unit Development Amendment initiated by Nash Wendell Falls, LLC, for an existing PUD governing the Wendell Falls subdivision. First, we're going to hear from the town attorney because there's some special rules that we've got to follow tonight on an evidentiary hearing. So, Mr. Cawley.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the board. This is a process that's a little bit different than what most public is most often familiar with, the typical rezoning matter. in which the board has discretion to approve or not approve. With a special use permit, if the application meets the criteria in the ordinance, then the law provides that the application shall be approved. Certain legal procedures apply, due process rights apply, which means that it's an opportunity to examine and cross-examine witnesses. The decision, this is also a key provision in the law applicable to these types of proceedings. The evidence has to be supported, the council's decision has to be supported by competent, relevant material and substantial evidence presented at the hearing. In other words, you're not to consider anything you've heard outside of the hearing, but base your decision solely on what's presented tonight. And the law provides that competent evidence does not include opinion testimony of lay witnesses as to the value of property, increases in traffic that propose a danger to public safety, or any other matters about which expert testimony would be generally required under the rules of evidence. There is an obligation to disclose any ex parte contacts that you've had. If you've been lobbied or anything of that nature, you should make that a part of the record so that the parties can ask you anything about that that might come up.
Okay, well, are you done? Is that it? I have received 2 emails and 1 private message, and it certainly wouldn't impact. In fact, I didn't even read them. And I think the board has received 2. Have you all received anything other than that?
I received 1 additional email as well, too.
Additional, okay. Same. For Commissioner Carroll, same?
Same.
Okay. All right.
The due process obligation is to provide a fair and impartial decision making.
Right.
So as long as you have not been influenced by any of those contacts, you can proceed to hear the case.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right. Town clerk is going to provide the oath for anyone wishing to provide testimony. So if you wish to speak, you can step forward now. If there's any chance you're going to speak, you need to come on, because you've got to be sworn in, and this is your opportunity to do that. So you can change your mind and not speak, but you can't change your mind and do speak. So if you want to, no, you didn't have to sign in. That's separate. So if you'd like to speak, yes, ma'am.
If you are going to speak during this item, you have to be sworn in. If you're not sworn, you will not be heard. Get ready for it.
It's better to go ahead and get sworn in and then not need it than to need it and didn't have it.
Okay, do you solemnly and sincerely swear that the testimony you are about to provide to the board is factual and truthful, so help you God? Okay. And as each of you come up to the podium, please state your name and address for the record.
All right, first we're going to hear from Mr. Bergmark. Good evening, Mr. Bergmark.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the board. I'll give a brief overview of the application, just some of the facts in place, and then I'll leave it to the applicant to kind of make his case and the whys of their request. So again, this is a amendment to a plan unit development being presented before you, public hearing. If the request were to be approved, and then after the fact, staff would create an order granting the special use request. So unlike some of our other items, there's not already an ordinance as an attachment. They've submitted a special use permit request to amend this PUD. That's the process that it goes through, and that's why this is a quasi-judicial hearing. This PUD was approved on November 5th, 2015. Since then, there's been about 600 lots that have been sold. We've had 4 years pass, so there are some changes that they would like to make due to market conditions and other factors that they'll get into. The boundaries, I want to make it clear, the boundaries of the PUD are not changing, but some of the zoning and development standards within the PUD are requested to change. You have as attachment A to your report the kind of full list of all the changes they're making with supporting information. But to briefly go over what is being requested, they're looking to amend the lot building standards to address front setback issues that have occurred on corner lots, and this entails changing the maximum front setback on alley-loaded products from 12 to 15 feet. They're looking to add a new residential building type for homes that would front on a common open space. They'd still have some type of road access, but they'd actually front on a green. They're looking to amend the maximum building heights for apartments and condos, commercial buildings, and mixed-use buildings in Zone 2 from 3 to 5 stories. Originally, this had actually been in Zones 2 and 3, but they amended their original submittal to just limit it to Zone 2, which is kind of their neighborhood business zone. Zone 3 was their kind of standard residential zone. They're also looking to modify the Wendell Falls design guidelines that are contained within the DA to include a buffering requirement between any 4 or 5-story apartment if located adjacent to a single-family residential use on the same side of the street. This would be a type B buffer, and they specified that it would be, if there was something more than 3 stories, that the buffer would be at least 25 feet in width and meet our standards of a type B buffer. They're also looking to change the allowed mix of housing types so as to treat apartment units as a different type from the attached townhome units and to modify the cap. So under the current PUD document, apartment units and townhomes are lumped together under a single multifamily category and are capped at 1,400 total multifamily units permitted. The applicant seeks to kind of decouple these and instead change it to be a maximum of 1,200 apartment units and up to 750 townhome units. The sixth change is to modify the plan map that I'll bring up in a moment to redefine the zone boundaries in order to make some additional land open to non-residential development. So essentially changing some areas that were Zone 3 that are shown in the yellow color on that map to Zone 2. So the diagonal hash area that you see on there that's adjacent to the red are the areas that they're looking to convert from Zone 3 as they currently are, which is kind of their standard residential zone, to Zone 2, which allows commercial and office uses and it's more kind of neighborhood business type commercial uses. And I mentioned that they did make a change to the original proposal. There were some concerns expressed over increase in townhome and apartment units, and so they changed it so that the apartment height only applied to Zone 2 rather than Zone 3. And they also made it so that it was a type B buffer if you had an apartment next to of more than 3 stories next to a home. Originally they had this as a type C buffer, so there were some concerns over that, so they amended it to be a type B buffer. So those are the 2 changes that they've made since the original submittal. I'm not going to get into the applicant's justification. You do have a copy in the report, but I'm going to hand it over, unless you want have any initial questions of me, to the Newland team to give their pitch.
Yeah, we can go on to the applicant. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you want this? Just the arrow progresses the slide.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. All right. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the board, Mr. Cawley. My name is Nick Robinson. I practice law at Bradshaw Robinson Slaughter, which is a law firm in Pittsboro, North Carolina. I've been working with the developer here of Wendell Falls since approximately 2014. And I have, just so you know, for the introduction, I've been practicing for 29 years, and about 20 plus of that has been in the area of land use and zoning law in North Carolina. I am thrilled to be here tonight on behalf of Wendell Falls LLC to walk them through this public hearing tonight and hopefully to seek your approval this evening for the requested amendment. And I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'll just work through. The parts that I think Mr. Bergmark or Mr. Colley have already covered, I won't spend a lot of time on. But Mr. Bergmark has mentioned that we're requesting an amendment to the existing special use permit for this project to amend the existing PUD document. And if you're not familiar with it, there have been a few faces changed, I think, or added since I was last here talking with you about the amendment in 2015. The entirety of Wendell Falls as a planned unit development is governed by a planned unit development document. And it lays out all of the standards for the development, including the places where it differs from your unified development ordinance. And that's really the whole function and purpose of a planned unit development, is to allow you to create special rules for a development of a particular or significant size. And so that's what we have in this case, and what we're asking is to modify only certain limited elements of the entirety of the planned unit development document. Just by way of background, Nash Wendell Falls LLC is part of Newland Communities, which is among the largest privately held master plan communities developers in the nation. And they specialize really in projects that grow with the market and accommodating the development experience locally. And some of you may know that they've developed another project nearby in Chatham County, which is where my law office is, called Briar Chapel. And, you know, it's worth stopping just for a moment to mention that that project started before the recession. And many of you know many developments failed and went under during the recession, along with many builders. Newland is not that way. They've got extensive capacity to do what needs to be done correctly within the marketplace that they're serving. And as a result of that, Briar Chapel came out of the gate faster than anybody else after the recession because they kept going. And that development has been at the top of the Triangle's list of communities for some time now. So I say that only to say that you're dealing with a developer that has extensive experience in learning how to adjust to market changes and to accommodate their development to what's happening on the ground. A little bit of background, many of you may know this. In 2006, this project was approved by was proposed by a prior developer who entered into a development agreement with the town of Wendell. And in 2006 and 2008, they received the approval from this board for the Wendell Falls planned unit development. In 2010, which was after it was originally approved, Wendell adopted its new unified development ordinance. So at that time, Wendell Falls project was not governed by the unified development ordinance and all of the new standards that were adopted. In 2013, my client acquired the Wendell Falls project and commenced development. And after a few years of getting their feet wet with it, came to the board in 2015 for an amendment to the project. And that was a pretty significant amendment because what it did was it helped to create a new category under your zoning ordinance for planned unit developments, which didn't exist under the UDO. It did exist prior to the UDO, and then it wasn't included in the UDO. So with the cooperation of the planning staff and the board that was created for Wendell Falls, and the planned unit development document that now governs the project was approved at that time. Some of you were involved in that. And then, so in 2015, that was approved, and since that time, Wendell Falls has been developing the project in accordance with that planned unit development document. And it's grown at a strong pace. I'm sure many of you have driven by to see. Applicant has developed, as Mr. Bergmark mentioned, and sold plus or minus 600 lots, residential lots, of which approximately 406 are occupied. The commercial areas, you can now see some of them are under development with several commercial lots sold and one currently under construction, which is the Cruiser's convenience store. And as David mentioned, as part of that natural progression in development of a master plan community, moments arise when some tweaking of the entitlements is necessary based on market trends and increasing development experience with that community and the specific project. And that's where we've arrived at now. So as a result, the applicant is here seeking certain targeted revisions to the entitlements to help ensure continued and long-term success of the project both for the applicant and for the town. This application was filed on July 20th, 2018, and just to bring you up to speed from that point to now, or actually even before then, we started working with the planning staff in February, I think my notes indicate, of 2018, and with David and Teresa Piner, regarding the experience of the development, both from the town's perspective and from the developer's perspective, and talking about some of the issues that had arisen and ways that we would like to propose to amend the document to allow those to be addressed. Since we filed that application on July 20th, the applicant has been hard at work, met with its residents regarding the proposal. Many of them, well, all of them were invited to a meeting that was held at Wendell Falls. It was a good turnout, and there was good discussion. And some of the changes, actually, that David Bergmark mentioned arose from some of the conversations with the residents. And has continued to confer with and meet with the staff about it. So as a result of those meetings and exchanges of information, there have been some modifications that have been mentioned and we'll go into in a little more detail. As Mr. Cawley mentioned, this is, of course, a quasi-judicial proceeding. And so I always, at the beginning of every quasi-judicial proceeding, as the attorney for the applicant, have a few statements that I want to make to get into the record. And part of it is to reiterate what Mr. Cawley said, which is this is an evidentiary hearing, meaning that your decision has to be, by law, has to be based on competent material and substantial evidence that's in the record. So as part of that process, I will be bringing up witnesses to have them testify briefly in each case about the rationale for the proposed amendments. But as a precursor to that, I do want to also say, as the attorney for the applicant, that at this moment we would like to incorporate into the record of this proceeding the entire application and all the materials, all of the planning staff materials associated with it, all of the documentary evidence that may be submitted at the public hearing by the applicant tonight. So, Madam Mayor, if that's okay and there's no objection, I would like to go ahead and have those introduced as evidence.
Sure.
Thank you. And in addition, this can be somewhat awkward, right? Because this is not a courtroom. You're not judges, and most of us are not litigants, right? But we're dealing with an evidentiary process. And so what I've always done over the years is at the beginning of the hearing, I've just lodged a generalized objection to any testimony that attempts to be put into the record that's incompetent in a legal sense, non-material, non-substantial, or hearsay evidence presented by any witnesses that are not tendered by the applicant. And the purpose for that is I don't want to be jumping up and down saying objection while regular folks from the town are trying to testify. If there's something terribly significant that I need to comment on, I'll do it after they're done speaking, if that suits the board.
All right, thank you.
And the attorney. Okay. Very good. Thank you very much for that. We'll follow the process that I think David has outlined. I'll bring our folks up for questions, and of course the board at any point during or after my questions to our witnesses, feel free to interject and ask any questions of our witnesses that you desire. If you want to hit them at that moment and you're afraid you might forget them or whatever, that's fine. Take no offense. And staff, of course, is welcome to interject as well. And then after we're done with our case, of course, the members of the public will have their opportunity to say whatever they want to say. And then we would just like to reserve a short time thereafter for rebuttal evidence if it's needed.
Okay.
Thank you. David Bergmark went over the requests, and I've listed them on your screen right there, A through G. Those are the entirety of the requests that we're making with regard to this document. The first one is to amend some lot building standards that are set forth in the PUD document. And essentially, to boil that down to common language, they had been approved for 7 single-family lot building types. And they're requesting approval of 2 additional single-family lot building types. One of them, and both of them have to do with lots that, rather than facing on a public road, they face on a common area and have an alley behind. And it's really just an additional arrow to put in their quiver in terms of marketing single-family homes to families and creating a community that has a lifestyle that they're hoping to create. The second one is to amend the maximum building heights for apartments and condominiums and commercial buildings and mixed-use buildings in Zone 2, which is the red zone that David showed you, as shown on the revised tables in Section 2 of the application. And what we're talking about there is allowing those buildings to be to increase in the maximum allowed height from 3 stories to 5 stories. And our folks will talk about why that's important. There was some concern by some of the residents of Wendell Falls that we had originally asked that that be allowed not only in Zone 2, the red zone, but also in Zone 3, the yellow zone. And we heard that, and we have withdrawn that aspect of the application and said, yeah, we don't need for the building heights in yellow Zone 3 to be higher than 3 stories, but we will need it in Zone 2. Additional changes to modify the Wendell Falls residential design guidelines, which are incorporated into the PUD document, a landscaping element, which is attached as Exhibit E to the separate development agreement with the town, to address 4- and 5-story apartment buildings if they're located adjacent to a single-family residential use on the same side of the street. And the idea there is just to make sure that if at some point there is a 4- or 5-story apartment building and single-family nearby, that there's proper buffering in between those to transition it. The next change has to do with the allowed mix of housing types, and you heard Mr. Bergmark refer to that. Under the existing entitlement, the 2015 PUD plan document and the original one, there is an entitlement of 4,000 residential units, and the combined total of, quote, multifamily under that document that is currently allowed is 1,400. So what that means to you is that 1,400 units under the current plan could be all apartments, or they could be all townhomes, or they could be some combination of either. Right now, townhomes are undifferentiated from apartments at Wendell Falls. And what they're asking to do is to decouple those 2 different types of multifamily housing, to make it so there's one category for apartments and one category for townhomes. And there's really solid reasons to distinguish between townhomes at Wendell Falls and apartments at Wendell Falls, which we'll get into in terms of the evidence. And so what they're asking for is that decoupling and requesting that the PUD document would be amended to allow up to 1,200 apartment units, which is actually a reduction of what they're currently allowed. They could do 1,400 apartments, requesting to reduce that, but at the same time to ask for a cap on townhomes at 750 units of townhomes. So the overall combination of multifamily apartments plus townhomes would increase under this proposal. The next change is to modify the master plan, and this is to really just make the map match up with what David was talking about, of shifting those red zones and expanding them a little bit bigger into what was yellow area. Second to the last change is to eliminate the map A2 that's a part of the current PUD document. That map was really there just to explain the original 34 zoning districts that were approved in the original approved plan. And in 2015, we reduced that down to just these 5 zones. That comparison is no longer relevant since the original plan is gone. So we would eliminate that map. And then the final thing is to combine maps A3 and A4 of the current PUD document, which is really just an efficiency thing. Those 2 maps, one of them describes the open space in Wendell Falls, and the other describes the circulation plan. And we've just put all that data on one map because there's not really that much data anyway, and it fits fine on one map. So we'd just like to make that change as part of this cleanup as well. Okay, thank you very much for your patience in allowing me to walk you through that. I'd like to go ahead and begin by the evidentiary section of this by asking Mike Siciliani to come forward to the podium. Good evening, Mike.
Hello, my name is Mike Siciliani, 6133 Taylor Road.
Mike, what is your job title?
Vice President of Operations
For
Nash Wendell Falls.
Okay. How long have you been in that job?
So I've been in this job 11 months, but prior to that, I've always been in the real estate development industry, specializing in master plan communities, so in total about 17 years.
And do you have responsibilities at both Briar Chapel and Wendell Falls for Newland?
Yes.
Do you have the same role?
I oversee the operations of both of our projects in Raleigh.
Okay. And how would you describe in general terms what your role is at Wendell Falls?
So at Wendell Falls, I oversee all the operations. So we have several project team members that manage the development side in terms of construction, master planning, and then we also have folks on our team that manage kind of the builder side with segmentation and contracting lots to builders. So I oversee all that.
All right, Madam Mayor, if I may, I'd like to tender Mike Siciliani as an expert in the field of master plan community operations. There's no objection? Thank you very much. So can you give the Board of Commissioners an update, just very quickly, on the status of the Wendell Falls project this time?
Sure. So before we get into all the details tonight, I just wanted to give you a brief update on Wendell Falls. I know I was here probably a month or two ago and provided an update, but there's been a lot of activity. So real quickly, and first of all, I just wanted to thank the town of Wendell, it's been a great environment to do business. We've enjoyed being a part of the community, and we're very excited about the positive contributions that we've made over the past few years. Specifically, we're very excited to be partnering with the town, with our local businesses, our schools. We're proud sponsors of the Track Out program, and we're very privileged to play such an important part in the local community. 2018 specifically has been an incredible year for Wendell Falls. We are now the #4 best-selling community in the Triangle. Year to date, we've sold 175 homes. It's averaging about 5 sales per week. It's about a 150% increase over last year. And what this speaks to us is it's proof that buyers are starting to discover the value of Wendell Falls and the value of living within the town of Wendell in terms of location, amenities, and product offerings. As mentioned, we're over 400 homeowners, approaching 500 homeowners. We're seeing an average of over 3 new homeowners moving in per week. Not only are we seeing great sales pace, but we're also seeing great home appreciation. We continue to strive to elevate our product offerings, and our average single-family home close price this year is up to $328,000. Again, that's for 2018. And this is an increase of 7% in 2018 compared to prior years. Our mixed-use areas are also taking shape. We've spent considerable planning efforts in 2017 and the first part of this year refining our plans. We've engaged with CBRE and HFF to represent us on commercial, retail, and multifamily to make sure we're out in the marketplace attracting the highest and best uses. To date, we've closed on the convenience store that was mentioned, Cruisers, that we're excited to see open this fall, the Rainbow Child Care site, and the Wake County EMS site. We're also having active and very positive conversations with apartment developers, medical users, grocery developers, and other retail. Moving forward, our goal is to deliver an urban-style apartment complex and a grocery anchor for our Tree Light Square mixed-use site. Again, these conversations are happening, and they've all been very positive. The involvement of these conversations on commercial, retail, and mixed use have led to some of the proposed PUD revisions that we'll go through tonight. As we've moved from a high-level concept plan from a couple years ago, and now to today, we're having real live, active, engaging conversations with these users. It's required us to tweak some of our plans as we finalized our latest plans. And again, we're trying to make sure we attract the best and highest uses to serve our community.
Very good. So, Mr. Siciliani, have you reviewed the 2018 PUD amendment application that we're talking about tonight?
Yes, I have.
To the best of your knowledge, does the 2018 PUD amendment application meet all of the requirements of the UDO?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the proposed modification to the apartment/townhome entitlement?
Yes, I am.
Do you understand that request is needed in order to create a flexible entitlement that would allow 1,200 apartments and up to 750 townhomes, but no requirement to build that many of either?
Yes, I do.
Okay. For the benefit of the board, if you wouldn't mind, just please explain the reasoning behind this proposed change.
Sure. As mentioned in Wendell Falls, we view apartments and townhomes very differently. Right now, they're lumped together. A few reasons why we view them differently. We believe they're more like single-family residents, and a few reasons for that. One, they're part of our residential homeowners association, so each townhome unit counts as a unit just like a single-family residence does within our homeowners association. The townhomes are subject to a rental cap that we have within the homeowners association that is at 10%. So whether you're a single-family home or a townhome unit owner, the total of those units can't exceed 10% in terms of a rental rate within the community. And number three, townhome residents have access to the community amenities such as our pools and other amenities, the gym, the clubhouse, just like single-family homes do. In Wendell Falls, as a mixed-use community, the townhomes are likely to be found amongst single-family detached residents, even potentially on the same street, but also they can serve as an important buffer and a transition from higher dense areas to lower dense single-family areas. So really, if you think about the townhouses, there's a picture up there now where if you look at the streetscape, at least to me, they blend right in with the other single-family residential dwellings. So they can be mixed in, but also they're an important planning tool as we get closer to higher dense mixed-use areas. We foresee additional types of townhouses that's going to help transition from higher mixed-use areas with apartments, retail, grocers. We envision, kind of higher dense, potentially three-story townhouses in those transition areas.
There's a representative conceptual drawing on the screen.
So again, we view townhomes very differently than apartments. Apartments, in contrast, they're not part of the residential HOA. They'll have their own property owners association, their own fees, their own amenities. They're not going to share within the community amenities like the single-family residential and the townhouse units. They're obviously all for rent product. The intent for us is to lower the apartment max unit count, as we mentioned, from 1,400 to 1,200, but break out the townhomes separately from that count. We're also proposing a max unit count of 750 for the townhouses to give us flexibility in offering townhomes as an additional for-sale product separate from the current multifamily unit that lumps apartments and townhouses together. And lastly, we feel, additionally, in order to attract significant scale in the quality of commercial and retail development that our community desires, we need to have the unit counts and the flexibility in each category of housing types necessary to drive and support these opportunities.
So just as a follow-up to that, with regard to the decoupling of the apartments from the townhomes, is it a possible scenario that you could wind up with, say, the 1,200 apartment units and far fewer than 750 townhomes?
Yes, absolutely. And that's kind of part of our request, is to give us flexibility. All of us standing here, it's hard to forecast, 3 to 4 years down the road. But from a planning perspective, it's important to have that flexibility.
Okay. So, in your expert opinion, is this change necessary for the long-term success of Wendell Falls project?
I believe it is.
Are you familiar also with the portion of the request that's relating to modifying Zone 2 boundaries and the Zone 3 boundaries?
Yes.
So why is that change necessary or beneficial?
So again, this is just related to us knowing more information today than we did 3 years ago. And I've said this before, but if you actually look at what was done a couple of years ago, I think it was fantastic, because we're pretty close to what was envisioned a couple of years ago. Fast forward, 3 years, again, we've had more active, real conversations, working with apartment developers, mixed-use developers, and so we've refined our plans to better reflect that feedback and our current deals that we're working on, the current conversations that we're having. So the zone changes reflect just being more accurate in our planning exercises and making sure that we're being as clean as we can in terms of the zones and not overlapping zones.
And so the map that you see on the screen now with the cross-hatching, does that reflect areas of the current plan that are Zone 3 yellow zones?
Yes, and I would like to note that, I believe this was mentioned, but in Zone 3 that's in yellow, there is the ability today, per the current entitlements, to build apartments in the yellow. So this shift is more about the mixed use and also aligning our ask that we'll get to in a minute on the height increase in Zone 2. And as we mentioned, we did clarify that we're not looking for that height increase in Zone 3.
So to clarify, mixed-use commercial development would be allowed in the red zone, Zone 2, but not in Zone 3, the yellow zone.
Correct.
Whereas apartments are allowed in both.
Right.
And then if this proposal is approved by the board, the difference between apartments that could be located in the yellow zone and those that could be located in the red zone would just be that those located in the red zone could be more than 3 stories high and up to 5 stories high. Is that correct?
Correct. And the reason for that is we're trying to make sure that we can get the appropriate level of design on the apartments and the higher dense mixed-use areas. So we're looking to do a more urban design in the areas that are more concentrated for mixed use, that have higher dense applications that are mixed with retail and commercial. And so typically if you see a 5-story, 4-story apartment building, it's more urban in nature than a 3-story suburban kind of typical garden-style apartment complex. So again, we're looking to elevate the design, elevate the product that we're offering at Wendell Falls, and having the ability to do 4 and 5 stories is critical to getting the type of product that we want to provide.
So based on all the input that you've received from potential developers and folks that you've been talking to, both the change about expanding the Zone 2 and the change about changing the allowed building height within Zone 2, in your expert opinion, are those changes necessary for the long-term success of Wendell Falls project?
Yes, they're critical to getting the type of product that we envision for Wendell Falls.
Are you familiar with the requested PUD lot building standards to allow for lots that are fronting on a common space? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Is this just recording, or is that? This is it. So there's only one mic. Okay. All right. Yeah. Sorry about that. So are you familiar with the requested PUD lot building standards? In other words, the changes that allow for lots that are fronting on common space?
Yes.
And the current PUD allows for 7 different single-family residential lot types. Is that correct?
Yes.
You propose to add 2 new single-family residential building lot type numbers 8 and 9. Is that correct?
Yes.
So could you describe for the board, please, what's the purpose in adding these new types of lots?
So as mentioned, and not to get too technical, but we're looking to create a new product. We've worked with one of our home builders, and we're designing a new product that we don't have currently within our offering at Wendell Falls. And so it is a product that would front on a green space or an open space. And so instead of having a front porch that overlooks the road or the street or your driveway, the design intent is to have a front porch on kind of your typical rear of the house, but it's really going to be the front of the house fronting on a large open space or a natural wooded buffer area. And the intent of that is to take advantage of some of the open spaces and the buffer areas and to be able to enjoy those out your front door as opposed to having your front door in the street. So it's going to be a unique product offering. You may have seen it in other areas, kind of like a Muse product or a Pocket Park product. So we're really excited about that.
Very good. Are you good? Okay. Have you reviewed the 12 findings required for approval of a special use permit or amendment to the PUD document?
Yes, I have.
And having read those findings and being familiar with the application, do you have an expert opinion on whether the combined impact of the proposed amendments meets and satisfies the 12 findings?
Yes, it's my opinion that all of our proposed amendments do meet the 12 findings.
Those are all the questions I have for this witness, and if the board has any, feel free to interject.
Okay. Do any of y'all have any questions? time?
A couple.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm just curious, prior to this recent act, did you, or as a development, have any idea of the number of apartments versus townhomes that you were looking for development?
Prior to the, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, prior to, the numbers you've given us tonight, the 1,200 and the 750 as far as your ask.
Mhm.
Prior to this, did you have any idea of as far as the ratio of the number of townhomes versus apartments that you were looking to fill under that previous 1,200 number?
Well, so prior it was 1,400, and it was grouped together. 1,400 was a total of apartments and townhouses. From a planning perspective, we've done a lot more planning over the past year. So I would say at the time that the 1,400 was established, it was probably just a planning number that gave us some flexibility. But as we've got further in the process, we've discovered having additional conversations, additional master planning, we really need to have additional flexibility to pull apart those different product types, because they are treated very differently in our current landscape and also in our future proposed planning. And to say that we're going to build the max of those is I wouldn't venture to say that at this point. It's really identifying a number that gives us the flexibility to meet the market demand and market flexibility when we're bringing in other users. Having limitations on the products that you can build makes it more difficult to get a grocery store, to get the restaurants. So this just gives us more flexibility to do those things.
I'm sorry.
Just to add to that, it's probably worth pointing out too, for historical context, that the 1,400 unit combined cap for multifamily came baked in with the project when they acquired it. So they weren't really a part of the original formulation of that.
Okay, all right. And then and with your past knowledge of your Briar Chapel development as well too, how do these numbers line up with kind of what you have at Briar Chapel currently as far as in the PUD there?
Yeah, so they're kind of apples and oranges, both on the project. This project is much more, I would say, urban mixed use in nature. We have a lot more. We have up to 2 million square feet here. I think Briar Chapel was 500. So the intensity of development of Briar Chapel is a lot different. Even the layout. If you've been to Briar Chapel, you have a commercial corridor, and then you have a long stretch that takes you back into the residential. So they're very disconnected. The plan here obviously is to have a more mixed use environment to where single family can walk to the commercial retail. So and also the timing. Briar Chapel was developed for the most part years ago. We're finishing it now, and we do have apartments and townhomes, but the numbers are less because of the timing of that development and the the market at that time.
And then with just in your discussions and seeing the market trends, are you seeing where, is it just a matter of, from you as a developer, being able to market yourselves to these commercial retail aspects? Is this creating just more flexibility for you? That's kind of the big...
Correct. I mean, I'm always a proponent to allow the market to tell us what is in demand. Briar Chapel, for example, I don't believe that they distinguish between townhomes and single family. So we could have done a lot more townhomes if it was planned correctly and there was a need for it, and the transition zones that we've talked about for Wendell Falls was in play at Briar Chapel, but it was a different product, different land plan. So again, it's kind of apples and oranges. But yes, to your question, this just gives us the flexibility because we don't know, year, 2, 3 years down the road. This gives us more flexibility, so we're not, back here next year asking for another request.
And I might just, that's a great answer. I might just add to that a couple of items. One is, the development agreement for this development, if the development agreement proposal that's next on the agenda is approved, would run out to 2035. It's a pretty long-term engagement with the town of Wendell. And many things can happen, as we all know, over time. And so the current thinking over the next 8 to 10 years is that this is the flexibility that is needed. I will say that an interesting aspect of Briar Chapel is that even within the single-family strata that they have there, they have different size lots that are stratified, and they have maximums that they can build of each different size lot. And if you add up all those maximums, it's actually more lot than they have lots entitled. And the idea behind that is just like this, is to give them the flexibility within any given category to build as many as the market may need at that time. And that's basically what they're asking for here in terms of townhomes and apartments, is to have the document reflect the flexibility that's needed to build up to, but not necessarily to, that amount over time if the market reflects a need for it. Any questions?
How were the residents notified of the proposed changes?
So we did send out a notice, and we did have a kind of a PUD open meeting that we advertised throughout the community through the HOA. So we got the message out to all the residents, and we had a open forum where we went through all these updates, talked through the PUD map, and gave folks an opportunity to ask questions. And as noted, it was valuable because they asked some great questions that did cause us to change some of our proposed amendments.
In addition to that, if I may add, Mr. Carroll, there was a letter sent by the town to every one of the residents on the tax listing for Wendell Falls and for each of the adjoiners around the perimeter of the project.
Okay,
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
If I can call Dan Klausner to the podium. I'll try to come back to the mic for each question as best I can.
A little bit broader.
Yeah.
Dan Klausner, Director of Commercial Real Estate for Newland Communities, 6133 Taylor Road.
So your job title is?
Director of Commercial Real Estate for the East Coast for Newland Communities.
And so when you say for Newland Communities in the East Coast, what states does that include?
I currently have 10 projects covering Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, encompassing 1,000 acres of commercial and 10 million square feet of commercial square feet.
Okay. And so do those projects that you're working on for Newland include mixed-use commercial residential products, including those with multifamily townhomes and single-family residential?
They do. They range from smallest commercial offerings, 12 acres in Atlanta, to a project that has 6 million square feet of commercial entitled in Summerville, South Carolina, and that runs the gamut from grocery store, office, retail, multifamily. So.
And those are all mixed-use developments?
Predominantly.
And then what is your specific role with respect to Wendell Falls?
As far as Wendell Falls, covering that territory, I kind of work with the team from a strategy standpoint. I also work regionally to work with developers to understand what they're looking for and best fit that into Wendell Falls. I mean, my job is really to continue to raise the incremental value of Wendell Falls within the town of Wendell and Eastern Wake.
Okay, and when you say raise incremental values, you're talking about just the commercial real estate values or also the residential values?
No, one of the things I loved about Newland when I came on board 3 years ago was that, how we do mixed use and how the commercial and residential interact is so critical. It's critical to the success in bringing in anchors that we all want, like a grocery store, but it's also, how we interact with the residential is important to continue that pace of sales. I think that we've seen, as Mike mentioned, grow 150% from last year.
How long have you been at it with commercial and residential mixed-use development?
I've been in the commercial real estate business both as a private developer for 20 years, since 1998. Had my own company, and then recently, 3 years ago, came on board with Newland Community in the Raleigh market, and have since, over the last 2 years, expanded to run the East Coast.
Madam Mayor, if I may, I'd like to tender Dan Klausner as an expert in the field of commercial real estate development for the purposes of this hearing. Thank you. So can you give the Board of Commissioners an update very briefly on the status of the commercial elements of the Wendell Falls development?
And Mike touched on it, but really,
we've had sales, we've had some good sales, a little bit of the low-hanging fruit that we've gotten in place and seen vertical development start, which is really exciting, and helps drive the residential sales and increase those values that we're seeing. But the bigger part that we're getting into is kind of looking at strategic plans on the uses that we'll bring and how we combine, you know, like a Tree Light Square, where we're looking at the grocery anchors, ancillary retail, multifamily, and how do we all fit that together and then transition into the residential through the uses of different types of residential lots or the townhomes.
I didn't mean to be scribbling on the screen there. All right, good. Have you reviewed the 2018 PUD amendment application?
I have.
To the best of your knowledge, does it meet all the requirements of the Unified Development Ordinance for Wendell?
It does.
And are you familiar with the proposed modification to apartment townhome entitlement so as to reduce the total potential number of apartments from 1,400 to 1,200 and to create a separate category for townhomes capped at 750?
I am.
Could you, for the benefit of the board, from the standpoint of the person that's in charge of the commercial development, could you explain the rationale behind that requested change?
Well, there's a couple things. One, step back, and there were some good questions asked about, you know, the PUD amendment 3 years ago. You know, I think Newland realized 3 years ago that we had a whole lot of commercial in our portfolio, and we didn't have somebody addressing that. I was brought on 3 years ago after this PUD amendment happened, and so in that time, I've been talking to a lot of developers and working on other projects and seeing what has been successful. And so some of that is driving some of these changes in that what developers are asking for, what's successful in other communities that we have or other communities that we're studying to see what's successful. The other piece is if we look at the triangle in general, one of the numbers that's out there is 40% of all residential permits being pulled in the triangle right now are attached product, meaning townhomes or multifamily. And that's on average across the triangle. So we take that number and look at that as an average. But if we look at the triangle as a whole, there's a whole lot of areas throughout the triangle that are much more rural where they're just strictly residential developments without the commercial portion in it. And so you're not going to have the attached product in there. So I would say the 40% is a great guideline as an average, but we are looking for a denser product, and that is what is making mixed use successful. And so to be on the higher end of that 40% and closer to 50% and having the flexibility. The other piece from a flexibility standpoint that's important is when we get engaged in conversations with a developer that wants to come in and buy property and develop and put their money at risk in Wendell Falls and in the town of Wendell, it's often important to have those entitlements in place. If we have to go through a lengthy process to go get additional entitlements for townhomes or something to create the right buffer or show them the right site plan that mixes those uses together, oftentimes those developers will walk and find another opportunity because their time is money. And so it's really important for that flexibility for that very purpose.
Okay, and in that same vein, is this allocation that you're seeking tonight in terms of approximately 48% being dedicated to the combination of apartments and townhomes, is it out of the ordinary or unusual in this market for a mixed-use community?
No. I mean, as we're strategizing and creating these mixed-use sections of our neighborhood where we have neighborhood commercial, regional commercial, corporate headquarters, we're looking to bring the grocery, bring the ancillary retail, bring some regional commercial once we get enough rooftops and jobs with corporate headquarters. All of those things, I mean, if you talk about some of that land up by the interchange, we have entitlements to do 10 stories. There's going to have to be a buffer to protect our values on the residential side. And so it's critical to have that flexibility. If you're scaling back from a 10-story along the highway across Wendell Valley Boulevard, to something smaller. Now, do I think we're going to do 10 stories? I don't know. Who knows what happens with the market? The number of sites that are out there available for those types of large corporate headquarters that could do 500,000 square feet of jobs, there's not that many that exist today in the triangle. So we've got to have that flexibility.
I've put the map back up on the screen that shows the site plan revised as we have requested it. And when you talk about 10-story buildings, you're talking about in that lavender purple area, correct?
Yeah, and that would be, predominantly alongside the 87,
Okay.
the highway.
And then as you transition to the right on that map to the east into the red zone, the idea behind enlarging the red zone is to make the transition between what could be fairly significant and impactful building mass in the purple area, transition it down before you get to the yellow, which would be the mostly single-family area.
Yeah, in conversations with our brokers that do a lot of the corporate headquarters deals in the triangle, which they're talking about users of 200,000 square feet. There's 4 or 5 of those coming every year to the triangle, and there's not that many sites available. Those types of users would be a 40,000 square foot floor plate, 5 stories high. And that's just kind of a general rule of efficiency and rule of thumb. And so you're going to need to step down from there using multifamily, using townhomes, and a mixture of those to get to residential. And that's why it's expanded a little bit, so that we have that flexibility if that is the case and what we need.
Great, thanks. Based on your experience in general, and then also your experience specifically with Newland and its projects, do you have an expert opinion for the board about whether implementation of the flexibility afforded by this requested revision, entitlement revision, will be detrimental to the use of adjoining properties?
No, I mean, I think we take a similar stance to adjoining properties. I mean, we're a good neighbor and we want to do things the right way. I mean, we're going to be here long term, and we all have to go to the gas station, the grocery store, and show our faces with all these people every week, so.
Do you have an opinion about whether the implementation of this revised entitlement structure will negatively impact the value of adjoining or nearby lots within the PUD?
It should benefit the values, and that's the whole goal here.
In your expert opinion, does this amendment enhance the likelihood of the long-term success of Wendell Falls project?
Absolutely.
Do you feel the same thing about the provision of the requested amendment to modify zones 2 and 3 boundaries as shown on the map?
Yes, it gives us the flexibility to do the development in the right way, come what may.
Okay. Do you think that, is there anything you need to add to what you've said and what Mr. Siciliani had said about that particular request?
I don't think so.
Okay. And does that request, in your opinion, enhance the likelihood of long-term success of Wendell Falls?
Yes, it allows us, every deal should grow the incremental value of Wendell Falls.
And you're aware that one of the requested changes is to allow a change in the building height restriction for commercial condos and apartment buildings within the red zone, zone 2, to increase it from maximum of 3 stories to a maximum of 5 stories. Is that correct?
Yes, and that was,
Yeah, why is that necessary?
That was discussed with a particular developer that we're under contract with, and there was interest in going 4 stories, and even on the backside where it falls off to the greenway down there, to use that elevation change to create a 4-5 split potentially. So that 4-story product, 5-story product was an actual conversation with a developer and multiple developers that we've spoken to. The other point behind that too is to build a 4 or 5-story product is going to bring a particular renter that is going to also bring value to the town of Wendell. They're going to demand higher rents. It's going to be an expensive product, and so that's just growing the incremental value and the density that will help drive a user like a grocery store.
On the screen right now are some concept images for potential apartment complexes. You want to just describe those for the board, please?
You know, these types of developments, we're looking at 4- and 5-story product. You know, the architecture and the colors, the materials are all in line with the precedent images that we're sharing with our developers that we're talking to. It's important, you know, we don't want a, you know, flat wall with no articulation. We want materials that match the materials that we're using both in our residential and our other commercial products. We have, you know, precedents like the farmhouse, and we're seeing cruisers come vertical now. We have elevations with the Wake County Public Safety Building. So it's all about, you know, working with them to make sure the architecture matches up and we create a consistent theme across the project.
And to answer a potential concern, I guess, is there design control for the commercial aspects of Wendell Falls?
Yeah, we have an architectural review board, so all drawings are submitted to us. We work closely with the planning department to make sure that we're kind of working together and understand that, you know, what we want and what they want are similar in nature. And so we always, we like to get approvals before it even goes to the town, so that when it gets to the town, the planning department has a comfort level that our board has already approved it.
You want to discuss that?
And this is actually hot off the presses, came this morning. This is the first concept plan for a 4-story apartment that would be in neighborhood commercial areas. So it kind of gives us a comfort level of the type of product with enclosed corridors, elevators, that the developer we're under contract with is looking to develop in the town of Wendell. It really, to me, it elevates the product that, you know, above and beyond what we're seeing in eastern Wake County right now, and I think it sets a really nice bar for us.
Okay, we're closing in on the end with Mr. Klausner here. In your expert opinion, does this amendment enhance the likelihood of the long-term success of the Wendell Falls project?
It does.
Have you reviewed the 12 findings required for approval of special use permit amendment or to the PUD document?
Yes, I have.
Having read those findings and being familiar with the application, do you have an expert opinion on whether the combined impact of the proposed amendments satisfies the 12 findings?
It does.
All right. That's all the questions I have for this witness.
Thank you. Anyone? Okay, I guess not. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Klausner. Okay, so there's 2 witnesses left. These will go much faster, I promise. Next witness is Lee Bowman.
Good evening.
Lee, if you could just say your name and your address and your current job with Newland.
Lee Bowman, 6133 Taylor Road in Wendell. I'm the senior project manager.
All right, and so what are the responsibilities of the senior project manager at Wendell Falls?
Typically, coordinating development activities, which is in engineering, construction, those types of things are the primary duties.
Okay, and do you have a similar job at Briar Chapel?
Correct. I began at Briar Chapel in 2005 as a development manager, and I've assumed those senior project management roles about 5 years ago.
Okay, so on total, how long have you been involved with Wendell in the Triangle?
Almost
with
yeah.
Newland in the Triangle.
I've been in the Triangle now with Newland since 2005, so almost 13 years this October.
And in that time, you've been working as in project management for master plan communities?
Correct.
All right, if I may, Madam Mayor, tender Lee Bowman as an expert in the field of master plan community project management.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bowman, have you reviewed the 2018 PUD amendment application?
Yes, I have.
To the best of your knowledge, does it meet all of the requirements of the Wendell UDO?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the consolidation of the open space map and the circulation plan map?
I am.
To the best of your knowledge, is that combined map that you're proposing accurate?
Yes.
All right. Have you reviewed the 12 findings required for approval of a special use permit or amendment to the PUD document?
I have.
And having read those findings and being familiar with the application, do you have an expert opinion on whether the combined impact of the proposed amendments meets the 12 findings?
Yes, I do.
What's that opinion?
I feel that the proposed amendment satisfies the 12 findings.
All right. Very good. That's all the questions I have for this witness.
Do y'all have any questions from Mr. Bowman? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. And our last witness for this part will be, oh, by the way, there's the consolidated open space and circulation map with the word consolidated misspelled. Sorry about that. We'll fix it in the record. All right, and our last witness would be Richard Adams, traffic engineer.
Good evening.
State your name and address for the record, please, Richard.
Richard Adams, 421 Fayetteville Street in Raleigh.
Okay, and with whom do you work?
I work for Kimley Horn and Associates.
All right, how long have you been with Kimley Horn?
I have been with Kimley Horn for 24 years.
All right. Could you give a brief description of your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from North Carolina State University, and I have a Master of Science in Civil Engineering from Georgia Tech and a Master of Science in Management from Georgia Tech.
And could you briefly describe the licenses that you hold or have obtained?
Yes, I have. I'm a registered professional engineer in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia.
All right. I'm handing you a copy of your professional resume. Is that an accurate copy of your resume?
Yes, it is.
All right. If I may, Madam Mayor, can I approach to hand up these copies to the...
Sure.
Richard, do you have any prior experience preparing traffic impact analyses for mixed-use developments?
I do, quite a few.
And is that essentially the majority of your work?
Yes, I would say the majority of my work is related to traffic impact analyses and transportation engineering and planning, and specifically a great deal of that relates to mixed-use developments.
In what capacity have you been engaged by Newland for this project?
I have been engaged by Newland since before they actually acquired the development to look at it initially, and then conducting all traffic engineering type exercises since then.
Okay. And so are you familiar with the applicable traffic impact analysis for this project?
I am.
And what tasks have you completed for Newland with regard to this particular project?
I have reviewed the trip generation potential of the proposed development, both in its previously approved states as well as the proposed PUD amendment.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to tender Mr. Adams as an expert in the field of traffic engineering, including traffic impacts of mixed-use developments.
Yes, thank you.
All right, now, in connection with this application, attached to it is a letter from Kimley Horn and signed by you relating to the impact of these proposed amendments on traffic at Wendell Falls. Did you prepare that letter?
I did.
And in connection with preparing that letter, did you perform any trip generations?
I did. I performed trip generation calculations for the original approved development from 2008 associated with the original TIA, with the 2015 PUD, as well as the current PUD, proposed PUD amendment.
All right. And in doing so, did you follow the customs and practices in your field that are typically associated with that kind of a review?
I did. I used the Institute of Transportation Engineers methodology, formulas, and rates that are universally accepted in my field as the source to go to for trip generation.
Rather long question, so the mic. Based on your review, your experience, and all of the other information and experience at your disposal pertinent to this project, do you have an expert opinion based on a reasonable degree of engineering certainty as to whether the proposed revised mix of residential units would result in generally lower trip generation for the daily AM and PM peak hour scenarios at Wendell Falls?
I did.
And what is your opinion?
My professional opinion in that regard is that the absolute worst case would be exactly the same trip generation as previously approved. The more likely case is that it will be lower in the daily AM and PM peak hour scenarios.
And why would that be?
That is because the trip generation for residential, if we look at the three buckets we're looking at here, single family, townhome, and apartments, the highest trip generation per unit would be single family in every case, AM peak hour, PM peak hour, and daily. And that is very well established. And then the next highest would be townhomes, and then the lowest, again, per unit, would be apartments.
Do you have any reservations about that opinion?
None at all.
All right. That's all the questions I have for this witness, unless the board may have some.
Do y'all have any questions for him? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Why does single family generate more trips than townhomes or apartments?
That it's a very well established fact. It's probably the most studied group of all in the 3,000-page strip generation manual is single-family homes. But it's basically because families. You have more people live in a single-family house and go to more places and own more vehicles than in a townhome, and then likewise, much more than in an apartment per unit. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes the evidence part of our presentation, and I just wanted to walk the board through a few of the legal technicalities of this, and then I will, and that will conclude our presentation. So there are, you've heard me mention with all of the witnesses that there are 12 findings in the UDO under section 15.15B2 that are required to be made as part of the approval of a special use permit or an amendment to a special use permit. And I have prepared as part of the application, and I don't know if you all have that at your disposal, but I've prepared a written description of the various ways in which the required amendments or the requested amendments meet these 12 various findings, and I've incorporated that written response into the record. And so I'm not going to take the time to go over all 12 of these, but I will say that we are more than amply satisfied that the requested amendment and the evidence, expert, competent evidence in the record to support the request is more than adequate to find the 12 findings. I did want to take a little bit of time on a couple of the findings just to point you to a few of the high spots. And in particular, I'll go to the second one, which is the proposed use will not be contrary to the purposes stated for these regulations. The Wendell Falls project has established a trajectory that demonstrates accomplishment of the intent and the purposes of the UDO as set forth in Chapter 1 of the UDO. And in particular, it meets many of the items that the UDO specifically enumerates as what the purposes and intent of the UDO are supposed to be. For example, number one, directly from the UDO is this list, to provide a range of housing opportunities. Obviously, this request does that. To diversify and increase the per capita tax base, our testimony supports that as well. To promote Wendell's attractiveness to business and people from all walks of life. I think the uncontroverted expert testimony in the record reflects that that is the case. To increase community amenities such as parks, schools, medical facilities, and the like. Likewise, I don't think anybody could ever deny that that is the case with this application. And protection and preservation of natural resources and amenities, which it's doing through its open space and other programs at Wendell Falls. So I think there can't be any doubt that the request that is submitted, as submitted, meets the intent and the purposes of the Unified Development Ordinance. And if you walk through the various different elements of these 12 findings, you'll also find that the testimony that was elicited from these witnesses meets each and every one of those and exceeds them. And the record then, therefore, will reflect that the 12 findings can easily be met. And in the absence of any competent material and substantial evidence to the contrary, our request and the law's request is that the amendment would be approved. In addition, I think it's relevant to point out that your staff has found that the application is complete and that the proper notice of the public hearing has been given. As I said, there's abundant, competent material and substantial evidence tendered by experts that has been presented. And we would like to, at this moment, conclude our initial case and reserve the right for rebuttal evidence if necessary, unless you have some questions for me.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Gentlemen? All right, thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, we've reached the opportunity now for those folks who are in opposition to speak. If this is your chance, I'm going to get up one at a time and come up here to the podium and give me your name and address, please.
Good evening, Scott Louder, 229 Liberty Star there in Wendell Falls.
Good evening.
Forgive me, I'm not a public speaker.
Quite all right.
They addressed several of the concerns, so my list is much shorter. the one thing I still would like to, that I don't think they addressed, is they've promoted that we're now up to about 600 homes sold, and all those were done under the premise that the maximum or the least amount of single-family development would be 65%. Now they're proposing the ability to go down to 51.25%. What do you tell those 600 families that have purchased? The next item is if they're selling well into the 300s now, which is great for our values, they did not mention the value per unit of the apartments in comparison to the townhomes and the single-family homes. And I think that would be interesting for the public to know. And like I said, they addressed the other situations, and I appreciate them doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm Valerie Deloach, 1704 Drift Falls Lane. I do have a question first. Am I allowed to ask questions to people as part of this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure who this exactly needs to be asked to, if it's Dan or Mike, but I've asked this before, and so I just really want clarification on it. As far as, you know, I asked why this is being presented now. Why are we making such a drastic jump, as Mr. Louder said, to, you know, from 35% multifamily of the two together, apartments and townhomes, to jump to 49%? Because the attorney said that the Wake average, you know, that the critical number in Wake County is 40%. So I'm just curious why we're making that jump, that drastic jump, and why now when we keep hearing the words like potential and future and flexibility and down the road, but then in the next sentence it's critical. So I'm just wondering why now? Why is this a 2018 issue?
Well, I would say,
if I may, just for a second, sorry. I'm not sure exactly what the process or procedure should be here, but I guess I would recommend that if there's going to be a question asked of our witnesses, that our witness would then come back up to the microphone and answer, I guess. Is it?
I agree.
Okay.
I agree, yeah.
I think we talked about the fact that, you know, 3 years ago when this PUD amendment happened, we didn't have as much experience both on our team and in the Raleigh market as to what was going on from a multifamily standpoint, not necessarily townhome standpoint, or even how these mixed-use areas were going to develop. Over the last 3 years, we've done a lot of studying. We've had a lot of conversations with developers, and we had an issue to already come back and get a PUD amendment at the same time. And so having that flexibility when somebody does come to the table and being able to react to that at that time is critical to get a developer to move forward. If there is a long duration to go through another rezoning or PUD amendment or anything of the like, it typically will kill a deal. So we're responding to what the market has asked us. The 40% that we talked about, like I said, is an average over the whole triangle. While that does include downtown Raleigh, that's a very small subset of the triangle. So if we talk about large residential, strictly residential developments out in, you know, the outer parts outside, you know, up in North Raleigh with huge lots, those are all single family, you know, not attached products. So those, if you look at the type of product we're looking to bring, and we've always talked about mixed use, and I would venture to guess most of our buyers bought because of that live, work, play cliche, that's what they wanted. And so for us to do that, we have to have that mix and the flexibility to do it when it comes to the table. And so I know I was the one that brought out the 40%. Understand, that's an average across the whole triangle. I would say our density or our percentage should be higher because we're not going to be average from that perspective. We're looking for a mixed-use product. So does that help?
Yeah, I just, like I said, I was looking for clarification, and then I had one more question. This is for Mr. Bergmark. The attorney mentioned that recommendations were given by David Bergmark and the planning board, and some modifications were made to their plan. I was wondering if you could tell us what recommendations were made by the planning board that were not mentioned or not changed.
Certainly, the planning board did voice some concern over the cap changing from the 1,400 combined attached to the proposal for 1,200 apartments versus 750. This item was just brought to them for a courtesy review, so it's not really a formal recommendation in this case since it's quasi-judicial. It's not required to go forward to the planning board, but we wanted to give them the opportunity if they had any ideas to present it, and they did voice concerns over that cap changing. They did not voice any other concerns with the proposal as presented. And that was prior to the change occurring with apartments in terms of height restrictions being only, or height changes being limited to just Zone 2 compared to also Zone 3.
My name is Paul White. I'm a local businessman, and I'll be short. A major part of Wendell Falls. Is that me? You know, run me off. A major part of Wendell Falls is commercial, and I think it needs to be developed for Wendell's sake and for their sake. I would use the example of North Hills. If you'll go there and look at the commercial and look at the apartment complexes, you can get an idea. I think that properly built apartment complexes would help with the commercial that's going to be put in there, and it would fit. And I would hope we won't have what's in North Hills, but I would hope that the quality and the rent factor would be at a level that would be something that the town would appreciate and the citizens would appreciate, and that it would help to develop that commercial area, which would benefit all of us. Thank you.
Next. Please don't be shy. I know a bunch of you were interested. All right. Were you sworn in?
Pardon me?
Were you sworn in?
No, you don't
Okay,
need.
you have to be sworn in to speak.
Okay, I'm sorry I was late.
Okay. I'm sorry you missed your chance.
Okay, no problem.
That's okay. Anyone else that was here that was sworn in? There was a big pile.
For the record, we're looking at you, but if you don't say anything, we don't have a clue what you think.
Okay, applicant, would you like to speak? And if you could you address the value of the apartments that the first gentleman was speaking? I don't know which one of you would do that, but who answered Mr. Loach's question, so let's be sure and answer that one as well.
So I didn't understand the value of the apartments. Obviously, it's a very different product. We're talking about for rent apartments versus for sale product. The value of the townhouses, we are selling townhouses in the low 200s, which is just barely below the kind of our smaller single family detached product, the 26-foot lot. If you actually look at the product, the townhouse is 20-foot wide, or 26-foot lots have 3-foot side setbacks. So they're basically the same structure, just one's detached, one's attached, and the values are pretty close to the same. Again, in terms of the apartments, I'm not sure I can answer the value of the apartments because it's a for rent product.
What are they going to rent for?
I don't know if I can answer that now either. I know Dan mentioned that the product that we're aiming for and designing for is going to be a higher caliper with the 4 and 5 stories, but I probably can't disclose the projected.
Well, I mean, that's a developer-driven question. I mean, it's a whole pro forma of land cost, development cost, all of that, and they factor in, and just like anybody doing development of a commercial product, they have a hurdle rate of what they're trying to get. I've seen numbers, you know, in the marketplace that people are pushing for a number that's higher than what's currently here in the probably $1.40 a square foot range. That's significantly above what you'd probably see in this market. I would venture to guess you might see $1.20 as top of market right now. So it's a higher product, and it's going to be it's you know, going to have a lot of amenities, its own pool, its own fitness center, you know, dog washing station, dog park. I mean, all of those things that you typically see in these types of developments. So
mean, if they've done all the studies, they still should have a vague idea of what's going on the tax books for per unit.
I mean,
They answered, so.
Yeah, I would just say, Madam Mayor, in closing, we don't have any additional rebuttal evidence or testimony to submit, but I would say that now it's up to you all to make your decision based on the evidence that is in the record and the competent evidence that's in the record. And to my knowledge, there's been no evidence submitted of any kind, competent or incompetent, that challenges the fact that the application meets the 12 findings, and that therefore the application ought to be approved. So we would respectfully request that this evening you approve the requested amendment. Thank you.
Okay.
I've got one more question for the gentleman.
Sure, yeah, go ahead. No,
Is there,
your mom.
it seems like over and over, the underlying issue would be what the increased number of apartments are going to do to the square foot price of the single-family homes of the folks who are already living there. Is there someone who can speak briefly on any insight there? Could you repeat that? I'm sorry. Should the apartment number, or excuse me, the townhome apartment ratio be changed, what would that do to the selling square foot price of your product now? Is it going to decrease the home's value?
I mean, if executed appropriately, when you combine the multifamily and the commercial that comes along with that, and the appropriate transitions using whether that be open spaces or townhomes, it should continue the trend of increasing those home values. I mean, as we've stated, every step and every transaction we look at from a commercial perspective is thoughtfully considered to make sure it is going to increase values of not only the next commercial deal, but the home values for the next year. So these deals should, and that's the intent of them. Unfortunately, market conditions and recessions and those things, I mean, it's not a straight line that anybody can predict. So, but each transaction should, yes, whether it's multifamily, because when you're putting the multifamily and townhomes there, you're also at one point getting 288 apartments that will help drive a grocery store in front of it, so which will drive residential values. So there's kind of a step-by-step process that helps drive that, and we try and be thoughtful about each one of those.
So I can speak specifically to the for-sale product. So if you look at our current townhome offerings, which is our first entry-level townhomes, we're as we've shown on the presentation, we're aspiring to do additional townhome offerings, more urban, more kind of upper end in the transition zones. But if you compare our current single-family for-sale product and our townhome for-sale product, the price per square foot, they're about the same. They're in the mid-130s per square foot. And so if you're, from an appraisal standpoint, if you're looking at real estate and appraising real estate, if you're looking at a price per square foot, there's really no difference between our current townhome product that's for sale versus our average single-family product that's for sale on a price per square foot.
One more point. Sure. When you think about our strategic plan for various areas of multifamily, specifically to what you're talking about, in Tree Light Square, there's a purpose behind that multifamily play there. If we, in our regional commercial up along the highway, it would be a different play that would be really in that place to work and function with regional commercials such as theaters and hotels and higher density. If we looked at a play out on Wendell Valley Boulevard eventually, when that is built out, it would be in a location around corporate headquarters where it would service some of those jobs that are created there, where people want that convenience of, I can walk to work, I can bike to work, or I can jump on a express bus that goes to downtown Raleigh for $1.25 both ways and be down and back and never have to get a car out. So those purposes, they're put there purposefully to address a need that is kind of separate from the single family, and that's why those buffers and how it's executed is so critical. So when you think about just those three examples, and a typical multifamily play being somewhere in the range of 250 to 300 units or more, it's 3 to 4 different multifamily developments that all of a sudden get you to that 1,200 very quickly. And there's opportunities, whether you talk about corporate headquarters, regional commercial, neighborhood commercial, for a different type of multifamily that may address a different user and a renter by choice. Renter by choice is a big market trend right now that you have the overused term millennials, but they're everywhere, and that's some of the product that they're looking for. So I hope that helps address it as well.
And I'm sorry, you may not want to leave yet. I have a question too as well. And just forgive my ignorance, I'm going to kind of ask the same question in a different way.
Okay.
Could you speak to, if someone had a home, same square footage, same style and everything, and comparing that home, exact same, everything's the same except being closer to the neighborhood center. Can you speak to just the difference in the value of those two homes as far as market trends and real estate values and all that, if I'm just comparing the two homes? And I think that would help myself understand what we can really see with the value of these homes.
Absolutely. And I'll say, I'm not the residential guy, but I've learned a heck of a lot about residential in 3 years. And what I love about what Newland does, and I kind of am talking almost like a third party because I don't sit on the residential side, but we provide homes for every different type of buyer. And you're going to have a buyer that wants to be right there near the grocery store, near their favorite restaurant, maybe a 3-story product with a rooftop deck that can overlook the greenway, but I can still walk down and grab coffee first thing in the morning before I get started. You're going to have people that want to live out in the furthest section of Wendell Falls and have a bigger lot and have some privacy. And so we, as a master plan community developer, have to provide all of those opportunities to capture all of those users. And so I would say, if done correctly, all of those values continue to increase. I mean, you can, so it's each one of these is not geared towards solving a problem for one type of user. It's putting this type of user here where they want to be and taking this other user and giving them an opportunity over here.
Mike, I think just for clarity in the record, I just want to ask one question of Mr. Siciliani. Is it fair to say that if this proposed amendment is passed and implemented in accordance with the way you've described it, that there should be no negative impact on the residential home values of the existing residences?
Correct. And again, to the question about values, having the types of grocer, retail, commercial uses that we're planning obviously increases the value of everybody in the town of Wendell, specifically for Wendell Falls residents. To Dan's point, folks that want to be close to it can be close to it. Folks that don't want to be close to it don't have to. The areas that we're planning are not developed. We have those transition zones appropriately planned, so these changes don't directly impact any current adjacent property owners. So the folks that live there now, they're not going to be, right directly across the street from a 5-story apartment building. There's a transition zone, and that's the reason for the changes to the zones that we proposed, is to give us those buffer areas to make sure we transition appropriately on our future mixed-use areas to the current residential areas.
And if I may just add to that, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, to your specific question, that a lot of thought has gone into the various different elements of this proposed amendment, with the idea of having them work as an integrated whole to do the very thing that you're asking about, which is to preserve the values in the commercial, to preserve the values in the residential, both single family and multifamily, because in the end, that's good for Newland, right? They don't want to do anything that is going to make residential, single-family values go down. They still got a lot of single-family residences to build and to sell. And so that's the purpose behind putting this integrated amendment application together, is to make sure that at the same time as they're reallocating, they're also putting the proper buffers and transition zones and a plan in place for design review, et cetera, to make sure that that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Can someone ask a question that wasn't sworn in from the audience? I don't know, we've had. He was sworn in, okay. I just want to make sure we're doing everything correctly.
Agree.
Okay.
Kevin Lesnowitz, 409 Mill Station Lane. We've been homeowners for over 3 years. We were sold on the commercial. Commercial's coming. Commercial's coming. To Valerie's question earlier, a little bit tied to it. Why now? And it appears that we've been dragging for 3 years to get to just the cruisers level. We were sold on a grocery store then. We still don't have one. What is the proposed rate of increase in commercial that's going to happen in the next year compared to where we are now?
I can appreciate where you're coming from. Commercial is a long process, and unfortunately, to find the right developer takes time. To put a contract in place with a developer takes time, particularly a grocery store. Usually the lead time from going from contract through their due diligence, going through committee to get approval from a grocery store, it can be 24 months. And the way Newland functions and the way our team functions, and we're in full agreement, we operate maybe a little bit different from other developers, but we will not announce something until a contract has been signed, gone through due diligence, and has gone hard, maybe even closed. Because we do not want to end up with eggs on our face with, saying this group, this grocery is coming to town, because the day before closing a contract, and I've had it, the day before closing, a contract can fall out of place. And the developer may lose $25,000, they may lose $100,000. So, but particularly when you talk about a grocery store, there's a critical number. I mean, grocery stores, if you talk to Harris Teeter, Publix, Lowe's, they all have a different trade area, a different number of rooftops they want to see, but they want to see 10,000 homes. So there is a bit of density that needs to happen, but we're fighting that battle, and we're having success. But some of those multifamily conversations help drive to those rooftops, and we're getting, as you can see, a very nice product that's going to drive higher than market rents. That again brings in a buyer that high-end grocery is going to look for. They look at education levels, they look at demographics, they look at rooftops, they look at, and they'll look at the competition, where the competition is. And that's the story, obviously, I've been trying to sell is, if you look at Harris Teeter, Publix, and high-end groceries, you have Lowe's and Nightdale, but then beyond that, you've got, next closest ones are Cameron Village, North Hills, Flowers Plantation. We get it. I mean, and so it takes that critical mass to get them here. And then a lot of the retailers follow suit with that. I mean, that ancillary retail, and typically the multifamily really happens when the grocery comes. So we're having success. We're getting there, I promise. We just won't announce it until the contract, it's either gone hard or sold. We have to have confidence 100% that it's going to close and it's going to be developed. Because you've seen even all across the East Coast, 4 years ago, Harris Teeter bought a bunch of land and just land banked it and didn't develop. And it's been sitting there for 4 years. So we want to have confidence that when we tell you something, it's going to happen. And so is there a plan for a grocery store? Yes. And what will it be? We have our ideas, and we're working hard to make that happen. I can't give you anything concrete. I apologize, and it pains me every time I go to a meeting not to be able to talk in more detail. So.
board? Jason, John?
Call for all one more time, anybody that was sworn in wants to.
Yeah. Would anyone who was sworn in like to have an opportunity to speak? I want to make sure everyone who was sworn in would like to be heard had an opportunity to do that. Yes, ma'am. Sure.
I'm Nancy Wiley, 425 Mill Station Lane. So I think my question is to you. I just want to understand that part of the purpose of taking the ratio up is to attract a grocery store, retail, restaurants, whatever all you have planned.
That is part of the purpose. I mean, it's getting all the right uses in one place. I mean, that's what mixed use is. And so, when we look at the nodes that we have been working on and created kind of concept plans of Tree Light Square, which is our neighborhood commercial, or the Collective, which we're calling our regional commercial and our corporate headquarters, when we look at that and we start looking at, you know, a multifamily play in there, and then what, you know, a townhome transition and open buffers, and we mix that all together, and you start looking at those transition plans, which we've been pressured by our investors even to look at life of project and see what that looks like. And so when you do that in today's, you know, concept plans, it looks like this. And then, you know, knowing that in 3 years, market could change. I mean, multifamily is huge right now, and everybody every day in every conversation is like, when is the bubble going to burst? What's going to happen with multifamily? When is it going to go away? When are rental rates going to go down? So 3 years from now, does that change? You know, so we need that flexibility to be able to adjust and bob and weave when the market changes a little bit. But the end goal is we're still a master plan community developer. We've been doing single family homes for 50 years as Newland Communities. We're in, you know, 14 states. We've got 30 projects going on right now, and I mean, that's not by mistake. So I just think it is doing those deals right now. Yes, it does help drive some of the commercial uses. And believe me, our goal, I mean, from day one when I came in 2.5, 3 years ago, on March 15th, grocery store was the first question I was asked about. And I was looking at, I don't know, what do we have? 150 homes at most. So we've come a long way, and we're getting there.
So do grocery stores ask you, will they ask you if this is approved? Will that make a difference, or do they actually have to be in place?
If what is approved? This PUD?
Correct. Are they I mean,
They'll
will that make it easier for you, I guess?
They'll ask about what the plan is going forward, what's going where, what our numbers are today, but most grocery stores don't look at, you know, here's our projections for 6 years, because nobody counts on 6 years. I mean, we as master plan developers, you know, we're doing 10 and in some cases 15, 17-year projects, and we're forecasting out 17, 18 years. I mean, that's a tough position to be in, but when you buy 4,000 acres, you kind of have to have at least a starting point. You have to have a roadmap from 0 homes to 13,000 homes. And so we do properties, you know, we've had properties 500 acres to 25,000 in Arizona. And you got to go in with a plan. And you got to understand at the same time, you know, we're developers making decisions to maximize values and for everybody. And somebody made a great point, I think one of you guys just talking, that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, Newland needs our home values and lot values to continue to increase too. We're not going to make decisions that erodes lot values, which directly relates to home values and how home values are sold. So we're making decisions to, I mean, our interests are aligned. We all want the same thing. We all want to sell lots for more. We all want to sell homes for more, because at the end of the day, if we sell homes at a higher value, then your comps are going up. So we're all aligned in that.
So just one more quick question. The townhomes, you said were gonna be mixed in with some existing homes? Townhomes with existing homes?
So our current townhomes are mixed in?
The ones you showed?
Yes,
like the
ma'am.
newer ones?
Yes.
And like you showed a street, and I walk the development every day, I know where that
Right.
street is.
Right.
So are some of those lots that are now single-family possibly going to become the newer townhomes?
No, so so phase 5 is the current phase that has townhomes
Right.
in that phase.
Right.
There were planned to be a certain number of townhomes in that phase. That plan is basically designed, cooked, baked, ready to go. So that is separate from our ask.
Okay.
This ask is future planning efforts,
Okay.
more towards conversations we just had about the transition zones, getting closer to mixed-use residential. Not to say we won't have additional townhome product that is mixed into future single-family phases, but we also want to focus on raising the bar on townhomes and, like we showed, potentially 3-story townhouses. Offering some additional townhome product that we can get closer and closer to the more mixed-use areas and use that as appropriate transition between apartments, mixed-use, commercial into single-family.
And just asking because of parking. It's just an issue, so.
Right.
And with the street.
Right, and to the point that Richard made earlier, parking is less of an issue with apartments, obviously, because they have their own parking. Townhomes, there's less trips per unit, so there's less cars typically for a townhome unit as well, and townhomes typically have some on-street parking. So I think the on-street parking issue is actually a little bit less or more remedied with townhouses compared to single-family.
All right, does anyone from the board have any further questions? What's y'all's pleasure?
Mary, I'll just say this. I still have come in, it's had a lot of concerns with the, really not with anything else they do, and Newland has done a great product, but I had a concern with the large jump in the percentages from 35 to 48, like a lot of y'all did. And I still feel like this process really strongly favors the applicant and not the citizen, which is unfortunate. Like I said, having the evidence that was presented tonight was well in their favor, so based on the evidence presented tonight, I'll make a motion to approve the PUD amendment.
Okay. A motion to approve the amendment to the PUD document. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, all in favor? Anyone opposed? All right. Pass. Item number 5 is the public hearing to consider an amendment to the existing developers agreement between the town of Wendell and the developers of Wendell Falls subdivision, incorporating the changes instituted by the special use approval. Mr. Burkhart?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board.
Right.
As stated, this is a public hearing for an amendment to the DA development agreement that governs Wendell Falls. So it kind of the PUD document is incorporated into the development agreement, as well as there's some additional information dealing with water allocation and some other factors that aren't included with the PUD document. Tonight you're being asked to hold a public hearing, consider taking action, and there is a development agreement amendment that is prepared for signature if you were prepared to do so in terms of approval. This development agreement was first adopted in June 2006, and it's been subsequently been amended multiple times. So unlike the PUD document, we have made other modifications to this. One of the primary goals of the development agreement is changes as proposed is to extend the term of the agreement from 2029 to 2035 in order to lengthen developers' entitlements in the event that development activity is not completed by that original date. This subsequently also changed Exhibit C of the development agreement, which contains the developer's schedule of water and sewer payments. I want to make it clear that it does not push back payments but it does list additional years. But all the payments as originally proposed and the years originally proposed are still in the same years. But it does technically add additional columns to that table, or additional rows to that table. They've also amended the language in section 4.5B of the development agreement to clarify how partial water and sewer payments would be managed. Previously, that agreement had language to explain how failure of timely payments would be treated, but didn't really address the occurrence where you might have a partial payment rather than just paid versus not paid. Exhibit D to the developer's agreement also proposes an amendment to reflect changing timetables related to Martin Pond Road and Pool Road. So the current development agreement requires Newland to make improvements along the section of Martin and Pool either as development phases take place, with an ultimate road widening to occur no later than the end of December 2020. Newland's been in the process of developing phases along this section of road, and they've been in communication with the city of Raleigh about improvements to a water lane, a very large water main along this portion of the road as well. So in order to avoid a conflict between these two infrastructure improvements, Newland is seeking to amend Exhibit D to remove that 2020 deadline and replace it with a requirement that the final stage of road improvements be completed within 18 months of Corpud's water main installation. In order to avoid a situation where Newland's getting close to that deadline, puts in the road, and then Raleigh comes in, 6 months later, 10 months later, and tears it up. They've also included language to clarify that a bond for the road improvements would be required to be in place before Phase 7 of Wendell Falls occurs. So Phase 7 is a large tract on the eastern side of Martin Pond Road. To this point, they've just been developing on the western side of Martin Pond Road, closer to the school. So before that Phase 7 could receive a final plat, there would have to be a bond in place. Since its start, Wendell Falls, the phases have gone in place, have been designed for a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit, have been posted as such. There are some changes to DOT's sign blade guidelines that came up recently. So there is one piece in there under Section 8 of the DA that was going to more formally establish this as the expectation in advance of those guidelines going in place. There was actually one modification to this I'll go into in a moment based on our attorney's review. And finally, at staff's request, the applicant has proposed to amend Exhibit E of the development agreement. That contains the residential design standards to state that accessory structure setbacks shall be 3 feet unless otherwise provided in the approved PUD document. It wasn't really clarified to that way as currently stated, and a lot of the lots have a 3-foot side setback, and it didn't really make sense to say that your shed or your detached garage has to be set back more than the actual home does. So they're looking to make that change. I mentioned there were a couple of changes or corrections that the attorney brought up during his review of the DA amendment. You have a copy of that was provided at your station, in which the changes are highlighted in blue and underlined. But just to let you know, the change one is just a capitalization, a grammatical correction for Martin Pond Road. The second change is in Section 6. And that dealt with the language related to speed limits. The attorney just wanted to clarify. Originally, it talked about having, it would be 25, it would post it at 25 unless the technical review committee during their site plan review thought that it might warrant something less. The attorney felt more comfortable with that, just saying unless otherwise decided by this board. And finally, there's one other change that I don't have highlighted in this PowerPoint. I'm sorry? Was it the buffer yard requirement, Madam Clerk? If you could, actually, I have a copy right here. Sorry, the Section 6 is not actually the speed limit. The Section 6 deals with, oh, you know what, it's right there and I just went right over it. Deals with when Exhibit E first came into place. They wanted to add the language, Exhibit E, the development agreement, as incorporated by the Fifth Amendment to the development agreement. That way, if someone read this, they would know how to find that language, because it was not originally in place, it came in with the Fifth Amendment. So again, just a reference for anyone who might be looking at these changes. And then Section 8 was the one dealing with the speed limits. Staff reviewed this, and other than the amendments proposed by the attorney, we have no other changes that staff's recommending, so we do recommend approval as revised by the attorney. And that's all I have, and I'm sure the applicant may want to add some information.
Okay, do y'all have any questions? John, for David? All right. Public hearing is now open. If anyone wishes to speak in favor or in opposition, step forward.
This will be much more brief. I would just adopt the statements of your planning director in connection with this and request that it be approved. Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay. Public hearing's now closed. What do y'all wish to do, gentlemen?
Madam Mayor, I make a motion to approve the development agreement as amended by the attorney.
Okay. We have a motion to approve the development agreement as amended by the attorney. Is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor? No one opposed. All right. Thank you. Item number 6 is a public hearing for annexation petition A-1801 for property located at 1112 Edgemont Road.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board. As stated, this is a public hearing for an annexation petition for a 9-acre parcel as well as a little over half an acre of adjacent road right-of-way located at 1112 Edgemont Road. Action in this case could consist of approving the attached ordinance for adoption. Donald Klein is the applicant who is present tonight. He submitted the request. He owns the land at 1112 Edgemont Road. Property is currently vacant, sits directly to the north of the Edgemont Landing subdivision. They're seeking annexation in order to make this property more marketable to developers. He has no development plans of his own that he's expressed to staff. The applicant has also submitted an associated map amendment request. That's the next item on your agenda as well. And the Edgemont Landing subdivision, again, is directly to the south of this as a R4 conditional zoning district. Here's the parcel in question. What you're seeing, the homes there, is the entry Osprey Landing off of Edgemont Road into Edgemont Landing subdivision. So again, this is just a wooded tract directly to the north of it. Currently, it's zoned R30. It's a Wake County residential zoning designation since it's not been brought into the town of Wendell yet. Both water and sewer are nearby, serving the Edgemont Landing subdivision immediately to the south. So if annexed and developed, a developer would be required to extend those lines just into this 9-acre tract. Currently, the subject property is undeveloped, valued at around $142,000. So at the current tax rate, this annexation of this as an undeveloped property would result in just about $700 in annual tax revenue. Obviously, if it was developed, that number would go up, and it would be dependent upon the layout, how many lots they were able to incorporate. If this were developed in a similar fashion to Edgemont Landings, you'd probably be looking at somewhere in the low 20s in terms of annual tax revenue. In terms of providing services to it, we're already providing services to Edgemont Landings right next to it, so there would be no issue from a public works or police standpoint. That's all I have for you tonight on this item.
Okay. Does anyone have questions for Mr. Bergmark? Okay. This public hearing is now open. If anyone wishes to speak in favor or opposition of annexation tract, yes, sir. State your name and address for me, please.
My name is Donald Klein, 5301 Sendero Drive, Raleigh. I'm the applicant, and with my wife, the owner of the property. So we're speaking now as to annexation, I think, not the rezoning, correct?
Yes.
Thank you for this opportunity, and let me throw in a bit of praise for your planning director and planning department. My dealings with them, even on this very small project, have shown them to be very professional, and you're lucky to have that level of professionalism.
Thank you for telling us that. Thank you.
Well, you just dealt with the big bullfrog of Wendell Farms, and so here's the tadpole. We bought this lot in 1986. mostly as an attractive part of Wake County. The lot in particular had very attractive topography, had good drainage with no problems whatsoever there. But then since that time, Edgecombe, I'm going to say Edgecombe instead of Edgemont. I married an Edgecombe woman 61 years ago, and that's ingrained in my head. So Edgemont Landing has since come into that part, and it's the big elephant in the room. And what used to clearly be rural land, a very attractive lot, attractive location, but very clearly rural, with Edgemont Landing and a lot of other development along 97 and Wendell Boulevard, and of course with the new bypass. This is now no longer clearly rural land. It's clearly a part of a growing Wendell section. At only 9 developable acres, this will produce a negligible impact on the town's services that are required. There are some 400 units that will be in that area when the Edgemont Landing is completed and the residential area across the street, across the road. So my estimate is this adds maybe 5% to the load on the fire and police services. And as you've remarked, the water and sewer and utilities are already there in sufficient size. So that would be the end of my presentation until questions come up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? Anyone else wish to speak? All right. Public hearing is now closed.
Madam Mayor, I make a motion to approve the annexation petition for A1801 property, please.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the annexation petition. Is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. All right. Item number 7 is a public hearing for a zoning map amendment to rezone 9.58 acres, including right-of-way located at 1112 Edgemont Road.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is the corresponding rezoning to go with the annexation that was just acted upon. Obviously, right now, it still has a Wake County designation of R30. Same applicant for this case, Donald Klein. They're looking to rezone it to Wendell's zoning designation of residential 4 or R4. The Edgemont Landing subdivision directly to south is zoned R4, although it is a conditional district. So that was part of what informed that decision to apply for an R4, is to correspond more closely with Edgemont Landings to the south. But in this case, this is not a conditional district. It's just a traditional zoning designation request of R4. I mentioned it was already vacant. You just annexed it. I can skip by that. They've, again, initiated this to try to make it more marketable. Due to potential buyers, whoever that may be, nobody's been presented yet that would come forward, but likely this parcel would be developed along with the other parcels north of Edgemont Landings. It's difficult to do 9 acres by itself, although you can do so. And the R4 district has the following dimensional requirements, just for your reference. The minimum lot area is 6,000 square feet, minimum lot width 50 feet, depth 100 feet, front setback of 25, basically a 5-foot side setback and a 20-foot rear setback. And you have a copy of the uses allowed in the R4 conditional district, or sorry, R4 zoning district, excuse me, included as attachment A to your report. Again, there's the map showing the area in question, a little bit more zoomed out than last time. Anytime we're doing a rezoning or map amendment, we look at plan consistency. How does it relate to our comprehensive plan? In this case, the comp plan actually designates this as a restricted growth area, although I will point out that Edgemont Landing is also falling within that same, quote, restricted growth area. So this is an area that is based on the comprehensive plan, intended for more limited development under tightly controlled conditions. generally classified as lands that are not proximate to thoroughfares, not projected to be high-growth areas due to limited access to the transportation network and utilities, generally areas outside of the short-range urban service area for water and sewer service, and generally close to S1 and S2 areas, which might be more environmentally sensitive areas like floodplain or riparian buffers and things of that nature. The comp plan does include a list of uses that are appropriate within the S3 transect zone, and lists low-density cluster development or hamlets, single-family residential development, very limited convenience retail uses, some civic uses, although it even lists some industrial uses. Anytime we're making a change to a map amendment, we have to include a statement of plan consistency and reasonableness. In this case, in staff's opinion, the requested zoning map amendment is consistent with the recommended uses. And single-family development is a listed recommended use within that transect zone, within the S3 sector, and feel it's reasonable given the similar designation of Edgemont Landings to the south. The planning board, at their August 20th meeting, did vote 9-0 in favor of the requested zoning map amendment. They did also include within their motion, though, a request for the town board to consider evaluating the town's comprehensive plan as it relates to this area in order to consider changing it to the S4 sector. That S3 designation, if you really read the description of it, makes it sound like this is an area where you're not expecting much growth, where you don't have as much access to infrastructure in terms of utilities and roads. And I think that's more of a product of just how much time has passed since the comprehensive plan was originally adopted. So staff is recommending approval, but if there are concerns over allowing an R4 density outside of a conditional district, especially in the S3 transect zone, the board could consider assigning it an R3 residential designation instead, which has a minimum 10,000 square foot lot size, and you could take that action if you felt compelled to do so without any resubmittal required of the request. So that's all I have on this item.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Bromart? Yeah.
The conditional district for Edgemont Landing, what were the conditions that were placed on Edgemont Landing in order for them to get the R4 designation?
So there was a range, and Edgemont Landing originally was a conditional use zoning designation prior to the UDO, and then it got redone, or the newer phases got redone as a conditional district. Some of them related to some residential design standards in terms of use of vinyl, siding materials, things of that nature. I'm trying to remember I can't remember if Edgemont Landings had a size requirement. There are also conditions that related to when improvements would go in terms of new open space amenities, requirements for front yard street, or not street trees, but kind of front yard trees planted in the front yard. You had to have 2 trees planted in there. I could bring up the full list, but things of that nature, certain aesthetic as well as landscaping requirements, and some requirements that related to your open space amenities.
Because my only real issue with this is that Edgemont Landing was given that R4 designation, and they made some concessions to get it. I mean, that's what a conditional use district is. And while I understand the applicant wanting to have the same designation on the parcel next to it, without any of those same sort of conditional restrictions, that's sort of my only misgiving about that, so.
And when we had conditional use rezonings, there didn't have to be a development plan associated with it. With conditional districts, it has to be paired, a development plan with those uses, with those conditions. So if you're not prepared to put together a development plan, that does create a disincentive to doing a conditional district.
Did that approval predate the statutory restriction on aesthetic design standards?
Yes, it did.
Mm-hmm.
So you couldn't impose those restrictions at this point, those same restrictions?
Some of them, I suppose.
Yeah, the ones related to design.
It would have to be done carefully.
Sounds like something else. Well done.
We cannot impose anything, but they can provide.
Any other questions from the board? All right. Public hearing is open. Would anybody like to speak in favor or in opposition of the map amendment?
Again, Don Klein, 5301 Sendero Drive, Raleigh. The presentation that you've heard and have seen on the screen just about covers everything. I couldn't add much to that without a lot of repetition that you don't need at 9:30. But I will only add, perhaps in response to Mr. Boyette's question, this isn't just another piece of property on Edgemont Road. We actually share almost 1,000 feet of common property line. In fact, long ago, the proposed developer of that asked me if I wanted to sell it, and he reached me at a very inopportune time when I was dealing with a whole lot of other crises, and I said, sometime but not tonight. And so he went ahead and developed. I would offer only the repetition that this is an exceptional piece of property. Unlike the Edgecombe Landing, both the part that's now built and especially the part that's under construction and development, there are absolutely no water problems, absolutely no flood problems. So if that was a part of any conditional approval, that's out of the question. This weekend, we will probably have some water in the little creek that flows through, but otherwise it's a dry stream. So, and I, of course, can't make any promises about what would happen later on. I simply would add that extending the R4 zoning in this small manner might encourage further development along that line in this part of Wendell. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Public hearing is now closed. What's y'all's pleasure? What I'm going to do?
Madam Board, I don't know what you guys think, but I'd much rather put it as an R3 now, and I do think it needs, I do think this is a much prime area for development than maybe it's once thought of. So my thought would be put it as an R3 for now, until we can kind of better deal in this area. So I'll put that in motion if you guys like me to, but that was my thought. Okay.
Any other discussion on that?
If he's gonna make a motion, I'll discuss that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll make that form of a motion to rezone to R3.
Okay, we have a motion to rezone the property to R3. Do you want to say anything, Mr.
Yes, like I said earlier, you know, previous developers in that area agreed to conditional, you know, some additional design standards, some additional amenities, some additional this, some additional that, in order to get to that R4. I think in order to keep development in that area in the same sort of, to keep it to the same level that it is now, to see the same sort of development in that area on this parcel, I think that starting at an R3, and when someone buys it and they see that, you know, what it would take to get an R4 in a conditional district, that would go more towards preserving what's, you know, the sort of product being built out at Edgemont Landing, more so than to just go ahead and set it at an R4. So I don't have a problem with this R3, and I would also make it known that I don't think the board would have much problem with it being at an R4, you know, as long as it met most of the conditional district, perhaps that it joins it along that long property line. So I'm in favor of this.
Any other comments? Any other discussion on the motion? All right, all in favor? Anyone opposed? All right, no. All right, item number 8 is a follow-up to the letter of award for downtown development revitalization from the North Carolina Department of Commerce.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To give a follow-up to the award that received, this was in July of 2018, we received an award letter and a proposal package for grants authorized under the 2018 Budget Act. As part of this, we were authorized to receive up to $50,000 to be used for downtown revitalization. The town made a motion to spend $5,000 towards establishing a nonprofit group to organize downtown events. Downtown revitalization projects can include things like planning costs for produce a final plan for physical improvements, including architectural and engineering design, streetscape design implementation, public infrastructure, including water, sewer, electric, lighting, sidewalks, and the like, traffic, facade or building improvements, or property acquisition, wayfinding signage, or art or cultural installations. Proposals for the use of these funds have to be submitted to the Department of Commerce, Rural Economic Development Division, no later than October 5th, 2018. So we don't have a lot of time. Upon completion and submission of the proposal form, Commerce will issue a set of contract documents to the local government. Once one complete set of signed contracts is returned, Commerce will issue payment for the full amount of the grant with the stipulation that the funds be used as described in the proposal. So as local government, we're required to submit a progress report each January and July 15th. And once all funds are expended, submit a final report detailing the outcomes and expenditures of the grants, including copies of invoices, receipts, and so forth. By July 15th, 2020, local governments must submit a final report detailing the outcome and the expenditures of the grant, including copies of those receipts. So all this money has to be spent in advance of that deadline for that report to be created. So following notification of the funding opportunity, there were members of staff that broached the idea of using these funds to make public infrastructure, in this case electric improvements in the downtown core, specifically to repair the downtown's electrical wiring network and replace some downtown street lights, which are malfunctioning and requiring more frequent repairs. In order to solicit some more ideas, this board asked staff to take this item to the Economic Development Committee for advice on preferred downtown revitalization projects. So at their July and August meeting, this was discussed. Potential ideas were proposed. I will point out that the kind of eligibility requirement or criteria was not discussed at that point, so some of the ideas that were broached don't really meet the eligibility requirements for revitalization projects, and I underlined those in your report. So the ideas brought forth included things like doing some type of public-private partnership with the lot owned by Barry Perry to establish downtown parking within the property he owns east of Main Street, to create incentive grants for property owners to upfit their downtown buildings. There's an idea to provide promotional marketing grants. Again, I don't think that would meet the criteria. Idea to provide incentives for businesses to participate in decorating things like Wendell Wonderland or other downtown events. Again, I don't think that would meet the criteria. Provide some additional funding to the Meet on Main group for their programming. Again, I don't think that would meet the program criteria. And then finally, three other ideas proposed were to establish a permanent power pole along the Women's Club lot on the Cypress Street side, to provide for funding for downtown business facade improvements for things like painting awnings, flower boxes, or repairs to siding, things of that nature. And finally, to offer the use of funds to remove the metal siding on a building on the corner of 3rd and Main, owned by Mr. Shelton Bridgers. The Wendell Economic Development Committee, they did express a strong desire for there to be some buy-in to use some of these funds for downtown property improvements and to get buy-in from property owners who would be receiving financial benefit. But since we have to spend all these funds prior to that July 15th, 2020 deadline and include whatever our proposal is, or our ideas are within that proposal to the Department of Commerce, staff felt it important that any use of funds which rely on kind of the private sector to participate be backed up with some kind of secondary proposal in the event that there are remaining funds, so we don't leave money on the table. So what staff proposed, just for your kind of initial reaction and feedback on tonight, is as follows: to create a downtown revitalization fund to create an expanded downtown facade grant program. So it would be similar to what we had in the past, but it'd be much larger in scope, and if somebody wanted to make more significant improvements, they could. So in this case, it would be matched by private property owners, a one-to-one match, but could go up to $10,000. So if somebody wanted to do something like looking at the siding on the Bridgers building, we would not be held to the $1,000 or $1,500 we looked at in the past. Located within the core of the downtown, we had a boundary map that was just thrown out that kind of could be modified, but if we did, I would just, for simplicity, probably look at blocks. That they would be The grant improvements review processes would be similar to our facade grant program, reviewed by appearance commission, approved by the town board. And that we set a deadline that leaves us time that if money isn't taken, if, property owners don't take advantage of this program, that we can still move forward with another project as a town to make sure that we're not leaving the money on the table. So just was throwing out a July 1st, 2019 deadline. And then if there were money left over, the backup project could be making those improvements to our downtown electrical system, downtown street lights. But I did just want to caution that if we took this approach, I don't know what the project cost would be for the downtown street light and electrical improvements, so that if some of the money got taken up by downtown business owners, obviously, if we wanted to take advantage of remaining funds, we'd still have to cover any overages to cover the full project. So again, that was just something we threw together for your consideration, but we do need to move forward with a proposal relatively quickly because we have to submit this by October 5th. Be happy to take any questions, comments.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Mr. Bergmark?
I have one. The public-private partnership with Perry's, that's a mouthful, isn't it, for parking? Exactly where the parking east of Main, can you elaborate on that some?
Sure.
Are we talking about the space in between the buildings?
Basically, yes.
The alley?
Yes. It's a large alley, but yes, that's the area that was being discussed.
It is a large alley. Would that include any improvements along Campen?
It could. Again, the idea was pretty much as verbose as I just stated.
Gotcha.
Might not be able to afford to do both. He's gotten some estimates on the alley already.
Yeah, I have no figures for any of this, so it's just ideas at this point. So
What are y'all's thoughts, because we need to move on it?
So that's kind of the track that we're talking about.
Staff's
The opportunity to have two things.
on the project is to encourage private investment in downtown. A good problem to have a year from now is that we fully committed the grant for downtown aesthetic improvements, and then the town would need to fund the utility project in the following year's budget as a capital project. If that were to happen, we would have had $95,000 plus investment in aesthetic improvements, state money matched by private investment, and the town's share would then be the utility improvement. What this does allow is if the downtown owners do not buy in that full amount, then the grant funds would then go to reduce the otherwise town's commitment to the electric improvements. I know that the mayor and I sat in a meeting for special events downtown, and the electric's becoming problematic to maintain existing special events and limits where things can happen during those events. So the staff opinion is that expense is coming to maintain that level of events. We're having to add generators which detract from the event moving forward. So this provides an opportunity for an and solution with a couple priorities both identified by the commission and your appointed boards and staff.
I particularly like the idea of having options. We can do this and this. I particularly like that. So what are y'all thinking? Time is of the essence, so.
David, on
Didn't move on it.
Your projection, I want to say I had the $10,000 number. Is that in your presentation, it was like $10,000. I was trying to understand that's per business, like, so 10,000 one-to-one.
So I guess you're asking if it's linked to an address or an individual applicant?
No, I'm definitely not trying to muddy the water.
Okay. Yeah, it was just meant basically per project. If someone had a business at 22, Main Street or whatever, and they wanted to come forward, that, they could get up to $10,000 from the town if they were spending $20,000 for the total project.
Essentially, it's the facade grant with a larger amount of money.
Right, so, and that's
with
where I
those
was going with that.
parameters, yeah.
Highlight that you have a working board here. There was some angst during the budget because we were cutting things, one of which being the facade grants. We had kind of seen a dwindling of the usage of that. That said, the facade grant program was limited by the amount of capital we were allowed to put in it. I appreciate staff's recommendation and staff coming up with this plan. I agree with Mayor, I like the two-tiered approach, but I like the fact that what we're going to essentially be saying to the state is if you give us $1, we'll show you $2 in private investment. That's strong, and it's a new way of thinking in respect to downtown development. I'm happy that less than 3 months since we passed the budget, we've already not only replaced the program, but replaced it with funding that is much more substantial. Each grantee will be getting twice what we previously budgeted for the entire program. That was a $5,000 appropriation historically, so it's been multiplied by 10, and I laud staff for their work on this.
It definitely opens up opportunities for a big project, something more than a coat of paint. Coat of paint's great, but it gives us opportunities for someone that really needs to do something large, you know, there's always things like that as well.
But when it comes to the deadline of October 5th, we just have to show that we have that program in place, not that we've allocated those funds to
Correct.
individual businesses,
Right.
correct?
Correct.
Tell them how we're going.
We would just want to outline that it can be, because they have to authorize what we could be using it for. And I'm assuming that they'll be fine with this two-tier approach. I wouldn't see why there'd be objections, but of course we'd have to show it to them. But exactly, we just have to say that we've created this program, it's going to be available for up to this amount, and then we would clarify, but if it's not spent within this deadline, you know, then we're going to move on to this is our secondary project.
Yeah, remaining funds that wound up unspent, should there be any, could go to that. I think it's a win-win. Okay, what do y'all want to do?
Will you make action on this one, or just?
Well, we've got to let them know in October, so wouldn't it be good to go ahead and make a decision a month ahead of time?
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you do want official action, then,
Yeah,
I'll make a motion
take
that the
action.
board continue, with the proposed, with the proposal for the downtown development revitalization funds.
So, can you amend it to say you're in favor of doing it the way with the facade? Can you be more specific?
Well, sure.
I think I need to be more specific.
Described by the manager.
Yeah, as
First
described,
staff
that's
recommendations,
described by the
but
manager,
yeah, I was going to just,
That's fine.
yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion to, move forward with the, way Mr. Brugmark and the manager described. Is there any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, great.
Thank you.
All right, item number 9. David, you just might as well just stay up there all night tonight.
Yeah.
I
this is
just
gonna be a long
realized.
one.
I think we're done with you in a minute.
I got a break when everyone else was talking about
Okay,
Wendell
good.
Falls.
This is a fee in lieu road improvement request for the Bear Ridge Manufacturing Development Plan. I'm not sure if I got it correctly.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As stated, this is a fee in lieu request for roadway and infrastructure improvements related to a development submittal that we're in the process of reviewing the preliminary plan for Bear Ridge Manufacturing. So it's a commercial site plan. Bear Ridge Manufacturing makes things like metal roofs and items of that nature. This is located behind Knott Square Shopping Center. So in May of 2018, Kimley Horn on behalf of Bear Ridge Manufacturing, and we have representatives of Kimley Horn here tonight, staying late in the wee hours, submitted a sketch plan proposal for manufacturing use to locate on the property behind Knott Square. I won't read the PIN number, but it's there for the record. The property is currently vacant, owned by Verdar Properties LLC, but it's under contract for purchase, and the applicant is, you know, kind of completing their due diligence process. So this, how this roadway improvement would be treated is important for their due diligence. During site plan review, the largest question revolved around how to incorporate a minor thoroughfare called for under the Wendell Arterial and Collector Street Plan into the applicant's development proposal. I'll bring up on the following slide a map showing that area, but our transportation plan showed a 4-lane divided minor thoroughfare, which is shown as a purple line on our plan, running from the intersection of where Lousdene Road intersects Wendell Boulevard, and then it runs due east behind Knott Square, crosses Marshman Road, ultimately terminating kind of on the other side of Wendell Boulevard on the eastern extent of Wendell's jurisdiction. The intent of this is to provide access to the northern portion of Wendell that is relatively untapped, as well as, you know, as it grows, as well as provide a means for bypassing some of the more congested areas of Wendell Boulevard, which will become more important as we do grow out over the future for motorists who are just trying to get beyond the downtown area. So this is a section of that arterial and collector street plan map. If you see I'll circle the purple line if I can. So this is what we're talking about, and their site is kind of right there, roughly. So whenever possible, 4-lane divided roads follow property lines to split that burden among multiple property owners, so 2 lanes on either side of the property boundary, essentially. The alignment of this road, as shown in the arterial and collector street plan, follows this rule and was placed to be centered along the property line of Verdar Properties on the south side and Walter Scarborough's property on the north side. However, when the Chart House Conditional District was approved, that was prior to this plan being adopted. As a result, the Chart House Master Plan did not have to incorporate this road or even right-of-way along the eastern side of Chart House Drive, so this creates a complication when the property on the west side is looking to develop and trying to follow this plan and incorporate this road into their site, as it would need to be aligned. Basically, the road would need to shift up a little bit to clear the tracts on the east, which did not incorporate this road. The applicant's engineers, in conjunction with staff's on-call engineer, reviewed a potential road alignment in order to determine the best alternative alignment to accommodate our desire for the road, while also not disrupting the already approved development plan on the east side for Chart House. So you have that illustration as attachment A to your report. So in order to have a functional road alignment which would not impact that property on the eastern side, only a portion of the road could be contained on the Barrage manufacturing site. That roadway segment would not be really usable by itself, as it would not connect to Chart House on the east, and it would not connect to Wendell Boulevard until further development occurs along the Scarborough tract. So as a result, the applicant is requesting to pay a fee in lieu of roadway improvements for the portion of the road that would be contained within their client's site. The UDO requires that an engineer's estimate be provided for any fee in lieu of infrastructure improvement requirements. They provided this. We didn't have time for this report to get AMT's comments, but we have received that since then. So one other item that was placed out at your desk was a revised table that looked like this, that showed originally their request, they showed a fee in lieu estimate of $194,000. There was a couple of small changes with one of the aggregate base course unit prices, as well as the 20% contingency at the bottom that resulted in that fee being revised to $204,000. So this revised estimate is something that's been prepared by Kimley Horn based on AMT's comments. So that's now represents the request before this board. Given the inability to connect the proposed road within this site to existing roads at this time until further development happens, staff is in support of accepting or does recommend acceptance of this revised fee in lieu amount of $204,000. If approved, the fee in lieu amount would be due prior to building permit issuance. So that's what I have for you tonight, and as I mentioned, we do have a representative, Kimley Horn, here as well.
Okay. Do you have any questions for David, or the engineer? Yeah.
Mr. Burmark, is the fee in lieu, and I need some clarification, is it because of the fact that the road's having to be shifted up, or is just the future planning of the road coming through here that would be adjacent to the property?
It's because the road had to be shifted up. If Chart House hadn't already been approved, and that hadn't happened yet, then this road would let's just say that Chart House Drive exists, but the development on the east side of Chart House Drive hadn't already been approved. Okay. They'd be responsible, Barrage, for building half of this 4-lane road. So they'd have 2 lanes that would come and tee into Chart House, and they wouldn't have to ask for a fee in lieu because it would connect to Chart House, so it would serve, some immediate purpose. But since it had to be aligned to avoid the Chart House Drive on the east side, to clear it, it had to shift up so far north that it's only just kind of clipping the corner of this Barrage site and doesn't really serve a functional purpose until more development happens. So for that reason, staff thinks it makes more sense to take the fee in lieu rather than build this piece of a road that's not even a full section that doesn't connect to anything yet.
Any other questions?
I just have a couple quick comments. Looking at the drawing, it's almost humorous. looking at what they would be required to build. I mean, it's, you know, a triangle and a ribbon of road that looks just completely out of place on the backside of a lot. And in my mind, this is exactly what you use a fee in lieu for. You know, there's some other issues that come up. We talk about fee in lieu, and I'm generally not in favor of them. This, however, is one. And at the risk of making a long meeting longer, I'll just add a quick little anecdote. Before my time, some in the room may remember, when South Wilmington Street was being extended and 401 running south of Raleigh, they built a bridge in the middle of a cow pasture that didn't connect to anything, and it sat there for a number of years before 401 was finished. And it's my understanding the governor went and stood on this bridge in the middle of a cow field, didn't connect to anything, and they made fun of him in a newspaper for it. I don't think anybody doubts the importance. You know what I'm talking about, at the cemetery there on South Saunders and South Wilmington. So, you know, it's important to have this plan. This just goes to show the importance of having the transportation plan, and now we have this fee in lieu of, that when the land around it gets built, we'll have at least some money to complete out this part of the road. So I'm in favor of this, and I think this is an appropriate use of fee in lieu.
Any other comments?
Another option would be there's 2 of our 300,000 for our sidewalk, up Wendell Boulevard that we were looking for.
And it is important to point out that it does not have to be reserved specifically for this project, although it does have to be used for transportation purposes.
What do y'all want to do?
Madam Mayor, I make a motion to approve the fee in lieu of.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the fee in lieu request. Is there any discussion on the motion?
That's at the revised engineer's estimate.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
Madam Mayor, just one comment. I'm going to vote for this. The applicant seems to be in favor of it. All parties seem to be consenting that this is what they want to do. But I want to continue to highlight that this is nothing but a shakedown from local governments on imaginary plans that may happen in the future. And I continue to have issue with that. However, that's not what we're deciding tonight.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. Item number 10, the snapshot. I know we're running late, but I want to talk about this a minute. I discussed it with the manager a little bit this week, and told him about the purpose of it, why we have it. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm just going to tell you stuff. Thank you, though. The more I've looked at it, especially this one for this week, I think over time, the evolution of it is it has become kind of lengthy and become a place where we use for a lot of placeholding, and some of these things on here go back to well over a year and tell more of the historical process that we've been through with some of these things, and I just don't think it's necessary that they be on there. I feel like a page front and back is probably too long myself. And first of all, I would invite the manager to give us some constructive criticism for it. It's something that we've used as a tickler, so he can certainly take a look at that and do that. But for the time being, I would like to remove the bond with the blue. That's become an annual event 4 times a year, and we don't need for it to take up the amount of space that it does on here to tell us how we've done it and who provided refreshments and so forth. The second one, this comprehensive report with the city of Raleigh. Honestly, I would prefer the most recent activity regarding that to be on there. And if you look at it real closely, that's probably almost half the page on the back of the first page. I'd like to leave the sidewalk in lieu money because we like to keep up with amounts we have amounts that are there for us for different things. But it could possibly be moved to the front with our other, financial things. The estimates for improving the IT and code enforcement workspace can be removed. That's something that, this is from January of this year. The, code enforcement has been moved to another building since, and IT, we've got a lot of decisions to make about that, so that doesn't need to be here. But now we know the cost for the cabinetry, should we need to do that there. I'd like to leave the review of the town charter by the town attorney. We've just made the decision about the downtown development money. We may want to keep a little standing, how much has been spent of that, because we tend to keep up with things like that. And the approval and sale, that's of the Second Street property, maybe something on there that lets us know they're in their due diligence period. Do y'all have any, comments about any of that?
Madam Mayor, I think I agree 100% with what you're saying. Only thing I would change is I would change the wording on the sidewalk fee in lieu, perhaps change it to transportation funds fee in lieu. Because, as Mr. Bergmark stated, those funds only have to be used for transportation purposes. And I'm not sure if that 3,062 is only the sidewalk fee in lieu funds, or if that's all transportation in lieu funds that we have approved recently or going all the way back. But I would love to look back at the books and find out how many fee in lieus, we have taken and where that money's gone, and if that number is actually higher. If we've got money earmarked, that's actually higher.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that at all, but I would like to know what came from sidewalk and what came from.
Oh, yeah, I don't have a problem with that, but,
yeah, but that's fine. You can just at your discretion create a little place where we keep a running amount of, those funds, and that could be included there with that.
Yeah, I would need to seek Butch's aid on getting those kind of figures together, but I did want to point out that, we passed a separate sidewalk fee in lieu of policy.
We do have a sidewalk
And I think
policy.
that might actually call for the sidewalk fee in lieu to be used towards
Just
sidewalk, compared to when the transportation funds, the fee in lieu, that just comes from the UDO, and that could be used for anything transportation related.
Well, we can keep that sidewalk money in one little spot and the other money that he's talking about in another, and we can always decide to take that other larger amount and pull it over here. We just can't take this one and pull it over there,
I believe
right?
that's correct.
That's fine, so let's just keep it broken down, that way we know what we have and, how we can use it. But some of this other stuff is, I think is just, it's gotten long, and it's been very helpful, but it's gotten too long. Does anyone else have anything, they'd like to add about the snapshot? And again, I would encourage the manager to take a look at it, and if you have any suggestions, anything you'd like to do, modify it and make it more effective for us, that'd be great.
Will do.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, number 11 is update on board committees by town board meetings. I'm a member of the Triangle J Council of Governments and attend the county chairs and mayors meeting. I was unable to go this past week to be here to accept Business of the Month from the Wendell Chamber of Commerce for the town of Wendell, so I did not attend that meeting. They were at the very same time, but I will find out what they discussed and look at it, see how pertinent it is to Wendell. Typically, those meetings are more about relationship building than anything, so. And I want to thank the Chamber for recognizing the town of Wendell for the efforts that go towards the Harvest Festival. They mentioned specifically and things like that. That's the employees. It has nothing to do with me or really any of the rest of the board. It's the employees, and we appreciate their efforts. They're responsible for anything that you see at the Harvest Festival and anything else. The other one is the Wendell Fire Board, Commissioner Joyner.
The fire board met last week. There was an update on the previous issue I told you about countywide, and that issue has been taken off the table for, well, I guess a date uncertain. And outside of that, we started the audit process.
Okay, thank you. All right, and Commissioners' reports, we can start with you since we're with you.
It's gonna rain, stay inside, stay off the roads.
All right, Commissioner Boyette?
Yeah, in case anyone hadn't heard, there's a hurricane coming. You know, I think we've all had plenty of time to be forewarned of this one. We all know it's coming, and, I know it's busy at the grocery store, but there's no need to go restock your milk in the middle of driving rain. It really causes a hassle when people are on the roads, when trees are down and power lines are down. It stops the power company from getting the power back on as fast as they can, and, you know, it stops emergency services, ambulance, fire truck, police, from being able to get where they can, when there's vehicles backed up behind a tree that's down, also blocking the road. So, just stay home, enjoy, if you can, the city water, which should not go out. Having lived through Fran on well water and being without power for 11 days and not having water, really looking forward to sitting in my darkened house and being able to flush my toilet at will. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
All right. Commissioner Lutz?
None tonight.
Commissioner Carroll?
No comment there.
Real quickly, I want to remind you before we meet again about the International Food Festival. It's Saturday, September 22nd from 11 to 5 at the Town Square. It's always a good time. The Wendell Harvest Festival, Saturday, October 6th from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And the Halloween Treat Trail's coming up, Friday, October 26th. Always a great time from 5 to 8 at the Wendell Park. I did want to quickly talk about the storm. I know we've all kind of covered it. The most recent thing I heard is that it's been upgraded to a Category 4, and this is a really bad storm with potentially devastating results, flooding, power outages, winds, trees, tornadoes, so forth. I just want to urge you around Wendell, we've been checking our generators, and they've been doing some things like that, making sure everything that is battened down that can be moved and things like that. I urge you to do the same thing in your home. I was sent an email today, so I'm going to tell you the contents of it. To get some water, 3 to 7 days, fill your prescriptions, make sure that your important documents and things are at hand. Flashlights, batteries, supplies needed for children and pets and the elderly, and to document your home. This is something I thought was interesting. Get your phone. Everybody's got an iPhone now. Walk around and document your home, and your properties and things like that. And you'll be glad that you have that. If you need it, hopefully you will not. The last thing that I want to talk about is the roads. Once the immediate danger passes, there's this urge that we all have to get out and ride around and look and take pictures and put them on Facebook. And I'm just going to beg you to please not. Emergency personnel are out there. I saw this not long ago. We had some issues, and it's very dangerous. They're out there trying to help folks who are in need, and we don't need you to become one of those folks who needs help unnecessarily. 6 inches of water can wash away a person and 12 inches a car, and so please be careful and just don't go out. As far as school closings and shelters and things like that, I've been asked about that today as well. As soon as we have that information, we'll disseminate it over and over and over to the best of our ability. So please stay safe, and please I'm begging you to please stay home. You've got plenty of time to get the things that you need, and I think they have water at the grocery store right now. They had some earlier today. So all that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. All
right, we're adjourned. Thank you. Yeah. I'm sitting here fanning thinking, what's happening? Is it me?
Is the intern on at 8:30?
I don't know.
Ben.
Yeah.
Pick up truck.
We had that.
Are you on your pick